Right.
It's on the
Good.
sign right there, and it's hard to see, but the
Oh.
password is capital PH, lowercase guest, exclamation.
I'm glad you
And everything else is underneath that, I don't know.
Thank you.
Ready?
That's the lower letter line.
Right.
Nobody can read. They just put that up there.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock-ish, and I'm going to call this meeting of Citizens Advisory Committee to order. First item on our agenda is introductions and the roll call. Let's go around the room. Let's start over here with Josh and your self-introductions and who appointed you or who you represent.
Josh Bank, urban designer, project director at Dover Home Partners. I'm also the appointee of Justice Bond and Hillsborough County School.
Christina Bosworth, as appointed by County Commissioner Mariella Smith.
Nielsen Morrison, appointed by County Commissioner Cohen.
Ed Rajewski, I was appointed by Thea.
Stephen Hollenkamp, appointed by City of Plant City.
Rick Hernandez, Hispanic at large, appointed by you.
I'm Bill Roberts. I was appointed by the Aviation Authority.
Well, TPO staff, I'm the CSC liaison.
Boyd Prendle, I was appointed by Commissioner Pat Kemp.
Don Skelton, I was appointed by the board.
Hi, Sharon Gavon, I'm small business.
Anyone with us online this morning? See any?
Good morning. I'm Artie Fryer, appointed and representing the Transportation Disadvantaged Coordinating Committee.
Good. All right, thanks for joining. Anyone else online?
Good morning. This is Carolyn Brown, and I was appointed by Commissioner Myers.
Carolyn, thanks for joining us. We have one attendee. Terrence, you want to give us self-introduction, please?
Yep, good morning, Terrence Trapp, African American at large representative. Love the area, been serving for a while.
Good. Anyone else online? All right. Gail, do you need to do a roll call after having done those introductions, or are we okay?
Morning, Chair. This is Cheryl. I believe I have everybody in attendance, and we do have an in-person quorum. Can you please call a vote of consent for remote member participation?
I will do. I entertain a motion to allow remote participation by those members who will vote. I hear a motion.
I'd like to make the motion.
Terrence Trott moves. Is there a second?
Second.
50 seconds. Good morning.
Good morning.
Give you a moment. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Cheryl. The next item on our agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone in the room signed up for public comment? All right. Let the record show Christina Costa joined us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. Anyone online care to speak in the public comment portion of the meeting? All right, well, hearing none, and there being none in the room, we'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. The next item is the approval of the minutes of the August 3rd meeting. I hear a motion, or is there any discussion about the minutes of that meeting?
Sure.
Yes. Mr. Fernandez.
The closer you are, the harder it is to see, I guess. I'll move to approve the minutes, but caveat, I do have a couple of suggested corrections.
All right, is there a second to the motion? Christina Bosworth, second. discussion. Rick, you want to make comments?
Yes, sir. Actually, not a couple, one. On the 6th page of the document under unfinished business and new business, the video timestamp 2:36:17 is what's noted, and thank you to the reporter for having done that. Several of our last minutes, it's helpful. The chat or the paragraph C under Roman numeral 8 currently states request for staff to explore motion to rescind 2 items from the tip at the June meeting. I believe we addressed this at our last meeting. This is kind of unique to me. There was no request made to staff to explore a motion to rescind. There was, in fact, a notice of intent to rescind or motion to renew, and that's what we discussed at the meeting. I made a request that that be included on the agenda for today, and it was not. So in the interest of not rewriting history, I would like to see that bolded language for paragraph C removed and substitute notice of intent to rescind or motion to renew. That's all I have.
All right. Any further comments? All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes. We have a suggested correction. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone online opposed? Motion passes. The minutes are approved as corrected. That moves us into the action items on our agenda. And the first item is the TIP roll forward amendment. Morning.
Good morning. I'm Mike Donald, CPO staff. You have to excuse me if it's a little bit dry.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Connor McDonald, TPO staff, and also excuse me, my throat's a little bit dry. Just get to presentation.
I think it's the first time I've seen you live and in person.
It is, yeah.
Wow. Well.
IRL, in real life.
Oh, my God. Thank you.
We're easier to take remote. You might want to revisit that.
So again, Connor McDonald, TPO staff. I'm here to present the TIP roll forward amendment for 2022. So I'd first like to start going over the TIP and work program timeline. Of course, the TIP is the TPO document, and the work program is essentially the state's transportation improvement program. So every year we're going to follow, for this example, we'll follow the timeline for the TIP that was approved, went forward in June. So last July, FDOT began developing their 5-year work program. And following an extensive period of review, presented to the TPO board around the December timeframe, they released a snapshot to the TPO staff in April. And TPO staff uses this snapshot, the sensitive work program, to develop a list of funded projects in the TIP. So then in June, the TPO board has a hearing for the TIP, and subsequently this year they did approve the TIP. And then in July, FDOT approves their work program. And then in October, of course, the TPO TIP becomes effective. And then it's important to note here that funding must be spent in the current fiscal year. So if the funding is programmed for fiscal year 22, it must be spent that year. And an agency cannot save that money for later. So what is a roll forward? So using Project X as an example, between July and April is scheduled for completion by June of the next year. So when they develop their work program, they're going off the assumption that project is going to be complete, and so they don't have that project in that document any longer. So when it comes to April and between June, it's not placed in the funded list in the work program, and thus it's not included in our TIP list of funded projects. So what happens is, in a roll forward amendment, these projects, the funding is not authorized or committed in that fiscal year. So then it must roll forward into the next fiscal year. Therefore, it must be placed back into our TIP. And to note here, funding increases or decreases for projects are limited to minor fluctuations.
Could you move the microphone up to the front so you're talking into it, please?
Absolutely. Is it better here? Or stay here? Sound better?
Is the microphone on?
Do I hold it down?
I'm sure not.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So in this roll forward amendment this year, there are 3 projects rolling forward into fiscal year 23. The first project is FDOT's West Shore Interchange and Major Reconstruction. It's preliminary engineering and right-of-way for about $305 million. This is a total net change of a difference of about 1.2 million, and that is about 0.39% change of the total project. There's also City of Tampa's Nebraska Complete Streets project, which is construction, the same amount for about $3 million, the same phase, of course. And then Hart's new maintenance facility, which was an amendment earlier this year. The phase is capital, and it's the same amount for $4 million. So just kind of taking a side note here, every project in the roll forward amendment has already been in the TIP, and it's in the same phase. So for that reason, this presentation will focus more on the funding of the projects rather than the details of the project itself. So the first project in this roll forward amendment is the West Shore Interchange Major Reconstruction. In this slide, you can see where I'm comparing it to fiscal year 22, which is the TIP we're currently in until October, and how it would be if this amendment is approved in the fiscal year 23 TIP. And I've aligned these so that you can kind of see the fiscal years, and more clearly you can see it. Yes.
What table of the TIP is this in? Is this table 1 or 2?
So this would be table, these actual tables will be in the appendix, but these projects are listed in table 3.
Table where?
3. So it'd be projects that are funded in the next 5 years.
Is that not table 1?
This is from DOT's work program. So table 3. Yeah.
Okay, so where is it in the table that we just looked at on June 1st? Is that a table 1 project?
A table 3 project. I think that this would also be cross-referenced in table 1 as constructed, right? Because it has some construction funds.
It's actually preliminary engineering and right-of-way, so it would be in table 1.
Thanks for that.
And so when the, kind of going off of that, if the project is assumed to be completed by the end of fiscal year 22, it wouldn't be a not work program. So then it's not going to show in the TIP that was adopted in June, because it's going to roll forward into the next fiscal year. So the funding differences here are different in each fiscal year, with total net change is a difference of $1.2 million. And it's the same project limits, same FPN, and description and phases. The next one is City of Tampa's Nebraska Complete Streets project. This is more cut and dry. Again, it's moving I think roughly $3 million from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23. Same phases, same project codes, funding codes. And then Hart's maintenance facility, you see that $4 million moving from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23. And of course, you see here an additional $11 million that are in the prior year funding. And that's because when we received the amendment earlier this year from FDOT, we were not aware that there was funding in the prior fiscal years. When we received the amendment, the project for the amendment, this go around, we did notice that there was funding. So for transparency's sake, we just want to include that, but it is in prior fiscal years and it has been. So as part of our public outreach, which is now adopted in the public participation plan, days prior to September 14th, so this would be 2 weeks ago, we issued a press release on this amendment, posted it on social media, released a web page, and additional steps for property owners near the West Shore interchange who may be affected by delay in right-of-way acquisition. We posted 2 signs near the interchange and sent out roughly 170 flyers to property owners along the West Shore interchange. So with that, the recommended action today is to approve the roll forward amendment consisting of 3 projects to this year 22 and 23 TIP. And recommend approval to the TPO board. And I am here for any comments or discussion.
So thank you, Connor. Questions from the committee, Josh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me, this is a dense subject and not very easy to follow. Can you go back to the roadmap slide that showed the sort of step 1, 2, 3, 4?
Absolutely.
And can you kind of walk us through how each of those 3 amendments, maybe in a little bit more detail, what the process is for those to be brought as a roll forward? So for example, in July, they update their 5-year work program and they discover that for West Shore, for example, FDOT discovered that right-of-way costs are going to be more than they expected. And so they then have to provide a justification to the TPO to add more funds, and therefore it has to be updated. And because of the timing of that, that pushes it into the next year's TIP.
Right, and so what the language says is that there's essentially like a host of reasons that a project could be delayed. We don't know the specifics on what happened with these projects with the right-of-way acquisition, and this is just speculation from me personally, is that I know that they're in contracts with some of the property owners near the West Shore interchange, so it could be that they're working out those contracts, and for that reason it was delayed. There could be, a lot of reasons why.
Yeah, they could discover archaeological. There could be a lot of reasons why they should start getting ready. But the bigger arcing question I'm getting to is, do they have to provide a detailed justification to the TPO for this amendment? And if so, is that something that in the future could be provided to this board so that we understand exactly why each of these is rolling forward? So for example, the Florida project, rather than just saying, oh, this project rolling forward for question mark, it's, because the city has said they need to roll this forward for X reason. I think that would help us be better informed for how we are judging this as a package of roll forward amendments. Because, for example, if one of these projects is coming forward and doing something that, maybe they previously said they weren't going to do, or is contrary to some goals or objectives that we've set, it would give us a better way to judge that versus the things that we've said and seen in the past and the TIP as a whole. So I don't know, does that exist? Do you guys have that information readily available that we can see in the next 30 minutes? Or is that something that we'll have to just punt towards the next roll forward presentation next year?
I don't have the answer off the top of my head to the specific reasons why each of these projects were delayed. I know that for the heart maintenance facility, of course, they're trying to get to a higher amount, for its a high $1 million, but subjectively, so in order to construct the facility. So I should know the reason for that, but I don't have the reason, for the other 2 projects.
So then
I can certainly try to get that answer. Not certain.
So they don't have to provide you a justification.
Not that I.
Okay, that to me is very problematic.
Justification for why it was delayed?
Yeah.
As a professional courtesy, they usually tell us, and for the case of the heart maintenance facility in Florida, Nebraska, it could be staff just busy working on other projects and they haven't had time to kick it off. For the West Shore interchange, I think it was delay in executing the agreements. So we did ask DOT to explain what happened. We didn't feel that it was consequential to get a detailed explanation of what happened, because for the West Shore right of way, the cost is actually going down. So we thought that would be a positive. Florida, Nebraska, again, I think that was staff just being occupied and they couldn't begin the project when they wanted to. And heart maintenance facility, I think it was same issue, right? The money was on the table, but Hart didn't get around to spending that on this.
Okay. Well, I think those are important things to know, and I appreciate you telling us those.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. There's no requirement for them to document why there was a delay. We usually just ask them, and most of the time they're forthcoming with as much detail as they can provide to us.
The question, Rick Fernandez.
Just a point of clarification, Josh, if you really want to know about Florida-Nebraska, I can tell you what Florida-Nebraska was about. There was a disconnect in communications between the city, the state, and the Federal Highway Administration on that project. Long story short, city and state knew what was going on. Federal Highway Administration liaison in Tallahassee did not, and did not find out about it until practically the 11th hour, because that project was supposed to break ground this year. Federal Highway raised their hand and said, wait a minute, we need to be invited to the Tea Party, and it's going to take at least a year for us to evaluate what you're doing, do a traffic study, et cetera, et cetera. For that reason, the project was pushed forward into 2023. And we just learned recently at a civic association meeting that although it's being pushed forward into 2023, it likely will not be a full year forward. It may actually break ground sooner than October, November of next year. So they're aggressively pursuing it. That was the reason. It was a miscommunication between sovereigns.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with Josh. When I looked at the presentation at home before the meeting, that was the first thing in my head was why? Why are these moving forward? And I know they're not required, but it would be a nice courtesy if they were asked to do that, because we're asked to vote on rolling these forward, but we have no idea, no reason why other than they asked. So I agree with Josh.
Other comments, Terrence?
Yeah. Isn't that the reason that they're rolling forward, that they still have to, they were approved to start, like they're approved projects, but we just have to make sure that they're funded in the new year? Is that the reason for that's the reason for this exercise we're doing, right?
Yeah, so in order for essentially the check to be written, it has to match the tip in the appropriate days, the appropriate fund code, and the appropriate year. So it just has to, or not just, but it has to be placed. It has to match all that criteria in order for the check to be written.
Now, if a project was delayed for some, I don't know, some governmental reason, not a miscommunication, but like, you know, I don't know, there's a block of residents that all of a sudden don't want to do that, would you guys just show up here and ask us to roll forward the amendment, or would that have been called to our attention, like a major reason for a stop? I'm just trying to see the process, because I don't see anything, like, there's not much information I don't think you could have given me that would have prevented me from voting for this. You know what I mean? So I just want like the warm and fuzzy of knowing if it was like some huge deal, you would have come in and let us know.
I completely understand that, and I'm not privy to exactly why all of the projects were delayed, but I can certainly get that information in the future. I'm not aware of that instance happening in these specific cases, but of course, if I were aware, I would.
Thanks. Christine.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, if it's appropriate, but I'd like to float a motion that the CAC respectfully requests the rationale going forward for the roll forward, not in great detail, but a summary statement or two to the points already made. I think I want to bump it up, this subject, bump it up a little bit more than just a professional courtesy or a warm fuzzy. I want to know why, and especially if there were to be, like the example, citizen outcry. If there's a big reason that escaped our committee, I find that hard to believe. We're so tuned in, but is this an appropriate moment to make a motion like that?
Sure, I'll accept the motion to request further detail on future roll forward amendments. Is there a second? Boyd Crandall seconded. Any further discussion on this motion? Josh, you don't get to speak. I'm sorry. Kidding. Any further discussion?
This is just on Christine's motion.
This is a motion just on Christine's motion to request additional backup data on a future roll forward amendment.
Rationale, if I may.
Rationale.
A summary of the rationale
Okay,
for a roll forward being necessary.
All right. Any further comment on that motion? Josh?
Just very quickly, I think it would be worthwhile for the agency to have a representative come talk to us about that rather than through TPO staff, so that way they can answer questions more directly.
Okay, so noted. Any other comments, questions? I believe we can do this on a roll call vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed in the room? Any opposed online? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Sure, can I ask for clarification on who's the second?
Mr. Fernandez, we're discussing the roll forward amendment.
Right, I have a question, Connor, on that. I'm sorry, Connor, I'm being thick, I haven't had my coffee. The West Shore interchange slide, put that back up. Yeah, that number tracks with what I recall. So I want to make sure I understood what I thought I heard earlier. This relates to what was described to us on June 1st during our TIP review meeting as phase 1 of the West Shore interchange project, the preliminary work. Is that right? Is that correct?
So part of the West Shore interchange, maybe not the specific project, I don't recall, was part of the amendments that came in October of 2021. And that's when we referred to it as the preliminary phase. Johnny, do you have?
Yeah, early works, we also called it phase 0 for a little while. I think we're talking about the same phase of that.
We are.
Yeah.
We are, okay. And the number tracks for me too, 306 and some change million. So that project, that portion of the project, which has been divvied up into different sections, there are multiple tranches, but that portion was presented to us in June as being a table 1 level project. The rest of West Shore interchange was presented in table 2, which, as I understand, is a project yet to be funded. So what you're asking to roll forward now is $306 million worth of project that was in table 1 that we reviewed in June of this year. Is that your understanding? Am I stating that correctly?
So table 1 is the list of projects funded for construction. This project would be constructed or funded for preliminary engineering and right-of-way. So it would not be quite in table 1. It would be listed in table 3, all of the projects funded in the next 5 years. This project, since there are funds in the outer years, it was listed in the work program that FDOT began developing last July of 2021. And so then that was included in our snapshot in April, and thus it was in table 3, this tip that came.
We really do need to start talking the same language, because what was presented to us was table 1, table 2, and table 3 of the tip, not the work program. That's what we reviewed. That's what we were asked to vote on, up or down. That's what the board the following week was asked to review and vote on up and down. And this project was in table 1. I remember it was in table 1 of the tip for the 22-23 cycle at Sept, going out 5 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that this was in table 1 funded for construction, because I think that there are construction funds programmed. So this would have been approved in October as an amendment, October 21 as an amendment.
Right.
And then when we put it into the tip that was just adopted in June, it was still in table 1. And then the second phase of it that has nothing to do with this is in table 2.
Table 2. Okay, that's my recollection of the alignment. All right, thank you.
Sorry for the confusion.
That's fine. I told you I hadn't had my coffee. I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Other questions? Anyone online have a question or a comment? Connor, as I understand this West Shore amendment is all related to right-of-way acquisition, is that correct?
So the 2 phases are preliminary engineering and right-of-way.
Preliminary engineering one. And you know if this amendment has been presented to the West Shore Transportation Committee, or do you know?
So I have not presented this to the West Shore Interchange, but I am open to that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's an FDOT representative listening in, maybe they can provide the answer to that.
Anyone online from FDOT that would care to comment?
Justin Hall's on vacation.
Apparently not.
He's
All
in
right.
Norway.
Yes, Josh,
I would just like to maybe suggest, without having to make a motion, that we delay this for our next meeting with the hopes that we get a little bit more detail coming back, perhaps not from representatives like I mentioned, but just a little more detail from staff on each of those items. But if I have to make a motion.
We'll say Mike Marino serves on one of our committees. He's the president of the West Shore Alliance, so he definitely knows about this, and if he doesn't yet, he will. I know that he had a meeting with the secretary yesterday to talk about some other projects through West Shore, and I would be very surprised if he wasn't informed of this. Regarding the justification for delaying the projects, we invited Cal Hardy from the city of Tampa to talk about the moves plan some months ago, and he actually talked about the delays on Flora, Nebraska. I think Rick asked a question and Cal explained that. We have been briefed on HART on the delays for the heavy maintenance facility. The only project delay that we don't have a ton of detail on is the West Shore interchange. But again, that's a very complicated project requiring them to execute like a number of contracts to acquire all that right away. So it's not really surprising to us that it would have been delayed. So none of that is shocking. I go along with the committee's request if they want to delay, but I wouldn't advise against that.
any other questions? Christine, did you have a question?
Yes, I'd like to just make a comment that the West Shore Alliance has a new director of transportation. And in addition to the executive director, Michael Marino, I think it would be great. I just want to issue an invitation for Waldo Carbo, the new transportation director for the West Shore Alliance, to come and introduce himself to our committee.
Good suggestion. All right, any other questions or comments? Anyone online have a comment or a question? All right, if there are no further questions, let's do this by voice vote. We have a motion to approve the roll forward amendments. All in favor, please say aye.
I'm sorry, we have a motion. Do we have a motion?
I don't think we have a motion. We don't have
I'm sorry, we don't have.
We may have a motion to table it. Josh wants to make it.
My apologies. I'll accept the motion regarding the action item to accept the roll forward amendments. Terrence?
I make the motion to accept the amendments.
All right, we have a motion now. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Sharon? All right, now we have a motion. Chair is caught up. Any further discussion? I think this may warrant a roll call vote. Cheryl, if you would not mind, please call the roll on the motion to approve these three roll forward amendments.
Bill Roberts,
Yes?
Rick Fernandez,
Yes.
David Bailey, Carolyn Brown,
Yes.
Hoyt Prindle,
Yes.
Christina Bosworth,
Yes.
Misa Morrison,
Yes.
Aya Yasin, Stephen Hollenkamp,
Yes.
Nicole Rice, Christina Costa,
Yes.
Artie Fryer,
Yes.
Nicholas Glover, Don Skelton Jr.,
Yes.
Ed Mabruski,
Yes.
Jonathan Knudsen, Sharon Gaman,
Yes.
Terrence Trott,
Yes.
Rick Richmond, Joshua Frank.
No.
Motion passes 13-1.
All right. Connor, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming.
Chair,
Yes.
I just have a point of order. I just heard Richmond's name being called. I noted on the attendance roster that that seat is now vacant. Did he leave us? Rick Richmond?
Yeah, he resigned months back, I think. The new Rick Richmond is the or was the appointee from the planning commission. Right. And the planning commission just voted on replacement. That's going to go to the board for action in October. So if they accept him as a new member, he'll be joining us in November.
Who is that?
Don Newman. And Don Newman, I haven't met him yet, so can't give him any info on anything about him.
So that seat is, at least for the next month, going to be a vacant seat
Right.
on our roster.
I think he might be listening in. He told me that he'd like to lurk, sit back and observe and get a sense of the committee. So he may be online. I'm not sure.
Christine, did you have a?
Just a question, is anyone else really warm in this room today? Is it?
It's warm. Normally I put a sweater on and I don't have one on today.
I have a fan, so no.
No coffee, but you have a fan.
You and Charlie Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks. Might just be me.
Come sit over here, I'll share my fan with you.
Yeah.
All right, we can move on to the next action item. Johnny Wong is right.
Johnny Wong, TPO staff, and this item is regarding a letter of comment on the FDOT SIS cost feasible plan. So the first thing is that SIS stands for Strategic Intermodal System. That is a designation from the state. FDOT considers this network to be the highest priority across the state for investments. The facilities that would be designated as SIS provide economic growth and mobility and facilitate interregional, cross-county, interstate, and in some cases, international travel. So these are some of the most important corridors to the economic vibrancy of the region. Some of the SIS facilities that you may recognize are the port, the airport, SR60, which is a major freight corridor across the state, and all of the interstates, 275, 75, and I-4. There is a SIS cost feasible plan that the state updates about every 2 to 3 years, and they time it along with revenue projections, so they have a sense of how much money can be invested in preserving or improving the SIS. And so we received this draft SIS cost feasible plan. I included it in your packet last month, but we didn't have time to draw too much attention to it, so I included it again. And staff have reviewed the list of projects. There are about 3 dozen, give or take. I didn't actually count them, but 3 dozen projects spanning District 7, so going from Citrus, Hernando County to the north, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough. About 40% of those 30 or so projects are in Hillsborough. A lot of them are interchange reconstructions, managed lane projects. Some of them apply to SIS connectors, which are corridors that will lead you to a SIS facility. So roads like US 92 that provide access to I-4, and some of the roads that are out in front of the port that give you access to the port. Leading up to adoption of the cost feasible plan, the state circulates the plan to MPOs around the state and seeks feedback. So this year we have reviewed all the projects and wrote up a letter, which is included in your packet. I'll brief you on some of the highlights of that. And for the first time the SIS policy plan invites MPOs to propose projects on not only the SIS, but also parallel corridors that provide access. So specifically, they're soliciting proposals for safety projects, TISMO, which is Transportation Systems Management and Operations, like reliability projects, resilience projects, and we've included a long list of proposals in this draft letter. I'm going to scroll through and pull up the letter onto the PowerPoint slide, and I'll go through each of our comments in turn and explain the justification of each. Beginning with the highest ranked project on the list, I-275 from north of Lois Ave to north of Howard, and from Howard to north of the Hillsborough River. The 2 projects are identified in our tip, and they're currently ranked 69 out of 95 on the list of priority projects. That's table 2. We believe that the additional travel lanes will provide an important connection to major job clusters in the West Shore District and downtown Tampa. What we're asking FDOT is to clarify which managed lane strategies are being considered. DOT has told us in the past that they will not identify which managed lane strategy because that decision is made by a public process much later in the project delivery phase. But regardless, we're still asking them to identify which considerations are on the table and to involve us early in the process so that we can give them feedback.
Tony, really quickly. Yeah. By north of the Hillsborough River, you mean north of the Hillsborough River downtown or in Seminole Heights? It crosses the river 2 times.
I'll have to check on the project limits. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
It doesn't get into the DTI. North of the Hillsborough River means you're just over the hill, like Waterworks Park.
Yeah, I figured, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah. All right, thanks for that clarification, Rick. Sorry about that, Josh. The second project we're commenting on is I-4 eastbound from east of Orient Road to west of 75. We believe that this project will improve access to I-75 in eastern Hillsborough County. There is a project that should be coordinated with Hillsborough County. Hillsborough County has a project in our long-range transportation plan to widen Orient Road from Slide to Columbus, and we believe that those 2 agencies should coordinate if the CIS project moves forward. The third is US 41, which is a freight corridor from south of Pendleton Point, Madison Ave to south of Causeway Boulevard. This project will facilitate goods movement. Again, it's a freight corridor and provide connections to a minor job cluster. The project's listed in the TIP. It's 86 out of 95 on our table 2 priority list, and it's consistent with both the Hillsborough and Polk County freight logistics strategies plans that have been approved by each of our boards. The next is SR 60 from Dover Road to SR 39 and from 39 out to the Polk County line. We believe that that project should be removed from the CIS. It's not in our 2045 long-range transportation plan. Several years ago, when DOT solicited comments from us, we mentioned back at that time that it was not in our long-range transportation plan, and there are significantly higher priority needs on SR 60. That's one of our that's a segment that's listed on our high injury network. We believe that that money should be reallocated for safety treatments. I-275 interchange modifications at Bears Ave, Bush Boulevard, Fowler Ave, Fletcher. Improvements at the interchanges are needed. These are some of the highest crash hotspots throughout the county. We crunched the numbers, and at those interchanges that are listed, there have been nearly 2,000 crashes and serious injuries in just the last 5 years. A lot of them are at the ramps. We believe that special attention should be made in the design of treatments located at the on and off ramps, and crash reduction should be a high priority. We've offered that high visibility crosswalks, lighting, and speed management strategies should be considered at those locations. I-4 interchange modifications eastbound from east of Orient Road to west of 75 and Polk County line, and then McIntosh Road and Branch Forbes. So the specific design of the interchanges isn't listed on the CIS cost feasible draft. We're advocating for diverging diamond interchanges to be considered because those have much higher efficiency than the traditional design. And that would also be consistent with FDOT's current design criteria. 275 from north of Hillsborough Ave to south of Bears. That highway widening project is currently in the 2045 long-range transportation plan. As we mentioned to you last month, that specific project is going to be discussed at an upcoming TPO board meeting. Back in June, the board directed staff to prepare a presentation on what the effects would be of keeping that segment 6 lanes as opposed to 8. We haven't delivered that presentation yet. It's been delayed twice, so now it's on the docket for October. It's not really clear whether that project will be supported or not, so we're asking DOT to kind of pause.
Sorry, Johnny, which one did you just say?
275 from north of Hillsborough Ave to Bears Ave. It's currently 6 lane. And south is the DTI, which will be converted into 8-lane, and then north of Bears, that will also be converted to 8-lane. So for continuity in the LRTP, it's listed as viable for 8 lanes, but the board asked us to take a look at what the effects would be on keeping 6.
Just
Long-range transportation plan.
to be clear, as the chair, I'm sorry, I'm not recognized by the chair, I forget. To be clear, to connect dots, that project, 275 north of Hillsborough Avenue to south of Bears, that's the project that was the subject of a motion to strike that was made by Pat Kemp in June of 2021. She moved to strike those general lane constructions north of Hillsborough Avenue, one going north to Bears, one coming back south to Hillsborough Avenue from Bears. That was actually a motion to strike that originated here in this room and was recommended to them. Pat Kemp picked it up and the board approved it and struck those items from the tip in 2021. But striking them from the tip does not strike them from the long-range transportation plan. So they're still sitting there on the bench waiting to be called into the game at some time in the future. And what Pat Kemp said at sometime in the last couple of meetings was that she wanted to revisit that to get it removed from the LRTP. That, I think, was the status of play as of maybe 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So our staff prepared a presentation analyzing what the impacts would be. It was originally scheduled for August, but it got delayed to September, and now it was asked to be pushed off into October. We don't want to go too far off topic, but if the board wants to evaluate removing those from the LRTP, it will come through the committees as part of our public process. So if the board asks us to proceed, you all will receive that same presentation. The last project that we're commenting on in the draft cost feasible plan is the managed lane projects on interstate facilities. Again, we're just reiterating that if DOT, or we're asking DOT to clarify which managed lane strategies are under consideration, and if they won't articulate that at the time, to be sure to engage us in the process early before decisions are made about toll rates. All right, the second half of this letter is not DOT staff, forgive me, that was a slip for sure. TPO staff proposing projects that can now be included in the SIS cost feasible plan. So the SIS policy plan is asking MPOs to submit projects focusing on resilience to storms, safety, traffic operations, and we have identified some of our highest priority projects to get included in the SIS. So first, there are 4 SIS facilities in parallel corridors on our Vision Zero top 20 list. The worst SIS facility, or the worst roadway in the county, is SR 60 Brandon Boulevard from Falkenberg to Dover Road. As you recall, it's listed in the SIS cost feasible plan for widening, and we think that that would be a really bad idea because that money could be reinvested in safety projects. Segments of 275 and I-4 also rank among the worst, with 16 crashes per mile on I-4 from 275 to 22nd Street and 15 crashes per mile on 275 from Howard Franklin to Bush Boulevard. Big Bend is a connection point. It would be considered a SIS connector to US 41, which is a freight corridor, and 75. And the segment between 41 and 75 averages 17 severe crashes per mile, which is extraordinarily high. We have done a number of studies on those segments, so we have projects to offer at FDOT, and we're asking them to consider those for inclusion.
Yes, that could be recognized. The Big Bend, I have questions about because currently Big Bend is undergoing vast improvements right now. I mean, as we speak, Big Bend is rapidly changing. So those 17 crashes per mile.
Yeah.
I don't know that once these improvements are made, that that's going to really apply. I mean, they're making, it's massively, it's dramatically changing.
Right. I know that the county has some bookend projects between Simmons Loop and I can't think of what the other project limit is, but I don't think that it extends as far east as 75. Am I correct?
You're correct. But from 41 to 75, that's where most of the changes are made.
Right.
Up to Simmons Loop. From Simmons Loop to 301, that was done about 7, 8 years ago.
Okay, thanks for that.
As the exchange improves, some of that should improve anyway. So,
So I question that one.
Okay. We'll take a look at that and see what the impact would be. Of course, like we don't have the after studies to show what the impact is going to be of the county's projects. Hopefully it gets better, but still, like that's really high, or that's a really bad hotspot. So it's up to the committee. We don't personally feel that more safety treatments would be a bad thing, but we'll take a look at that. Second list of projects that we're submitting for consideration are ramps on the Septs, which rank among the lowest for reliability of travel time consistency. You all may know that we no longer look at traffic congestion in terms of just minutes of delay or reduced speed. We look at the impacts on reliability so that your commute time is consistent from day to day. Some of the least reliable segments are on the CIS or on parallel corridors that serve as alternatives to the CIS. So we're listing out Bush Boulevard from the 275 ramp to Nebraska Ave, I-75 from Manatee County line to Gibson Drive, 3 on SR60, Adamo from 22nd to 34th, Brandon Boulevard from 75 to Grand Regency, and Kennedy from Hyde Park Ave to Plant Ave. US 92 is a parallel corridor to I-4, and we're looking at the segment from Mango Road to I-4, which is not only listed on the CIS, but is also a freight logistics zone. And then lastly, we have trimmed up this list quite a bit. This was kind of our first draft, so we eliminated a lot of the segments that are not directly alternatives to CIS. So what we're focusing on is improvements on Courtney Campbell and US 41, SR 60, and 275. So projects that are bulleted out like Causeway Boulevard, Channelside, College Ave, Hillsborough Ave, those are probably going to be deleted from our list of proposed projects. And what will remain is this segment on 275, SR 60, the other on SR 60, 3 more on SR 60, and Courtney Campbell and Causeway. Resiliency projects help us in the event of a storm. So in the event that we're hit with a major storm, these segments that are listed are highly vulnerable and highly critical. If they were to go down, it would severely impact the economic output of the region, and hardening the pavement so that, or elevating the pavement so that it's not as susceptible to sea level rise and flooding, hardening the pavement and wave attenuation are some treatments that can assist with that. So that wraps up the letter. Please let me know if you have any comments. Christina, I'll take note of your comment. And
Josh?
any questions, feel free to shoot them my way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a few, Johnny. I'll maybe start with the quick hitter ones. State Road 60 and the vulnerability bullet. I also sit on the YCDC. There's an ongoing YCDC/City of Tampa study for Adamo Drive in terms of its land use, zoning, and also vulnerability to sea level rise. So I would encourage you to think about that as you're including it in some of the text here. I don't know if that's funded yet. They're going for a grant, I believe. So, but check with the city on that. I also, in looking at that section, the pavement hardening, raising the asphalt, those sorts of things, I'm not certain that that's congruent with the county's vulnerability and sea level rise plans. I know the folks who worked on all of those, and I seem to recall a lot of the conversation being around, more of the wave attenuation, thinking of the more broader strategies than just sort of the hard infrastructure, seawall type stuff. So I would encourage you to check that as well, because that may be against some of the county's own best practice recommendations. And then I think next topic is, I think it's worth calling out a couple things independently. I see in maybe 3, 4, 5 bullets here a reference to crashes, fatalities, Vision Zero. You have a bullet dedicated for vulnerability to sea level rise, but you don't have one dedicated towards Vision Zero. I think it would probably be wise to call that out independently as well as in each of those bullets specifically, because it is such a strong commitment, not only for the city of Tampa, but for Hillsborough County and for the TPO. I think just as equal as sea level rise, it should have its own attention. Because you mentioned that for the first time, the state is allowing you guys to comment on corridors that maybe aren't owned by the state, but in close proximity to or supporting of the SIS system. So a lot of those parallel corridors are also impacted severely because of Vision Zero due to the induced demand that the SIS is creating, right? So it's a natural relationship. Glad to hear that. But I do think it would be worth calling that out, specifically because of the fact that I think of the top 10 most fatal corridors, 9 or 10 of them are owned by the state, right? So I think it's worth calling that out and saying, hey, you know, not only is it the interstates, the port and all that, but it's these secondary support systems that are also equally, if not more so, deadly, right, for folks on bike head. And I think last but not least, I think the one thing that I don't see in here is the non-discrimination and equity statement that this board and the TPO has implemented. And so I think through that lens, a lot of these projects might be looked at a little bit differently, at least for the county. And I would hope that in communicating that to the state, they would be a willing partner to, you know, honor the statements and the commitments that the county has made. So specifically in talking about, for example, any widening of corridors, right, the amount of land and right of way that's being acquired, if that is disproportionately impacting minority communities in a way that is against the equity and non-discrimination statement and commitment, then that is again incongruent with the county's wishes and should be worth having on this list as a commented item. So I don't know if that needs to be its own bullet, but I think between those sort of big 10 topics, Vision Zero, equity, non-discrimination, and then the fatalities that on the state-owned network beyond the SIS is really important. So, but that's all I've got.
Thanks for those. Definitely going to help improve the letter.
Christine?
Johnny, I just want to chime in on, I don't really have a question, but something about the presentation and the review of the letter. It's got so much, but the tonality, like FDOT is calling this a strategic intermodal system, but all I'm hearing about is corridors and highways. So systems are about moving people and goods, not just vehicles, but corridors are just mostly about moving cars. So I'm concerned and somewhat distressed that there aren't any inclusions here on roundabouts, bus rapid transit, the Cross Bay Ferry. I just keep hearing roads and highways. And so I'm struggling with understanding, is the strategic intermodal system really a system or just more of the road content? So that's just my take on it. I do want to take also this moment to include, I'm a member of Strong Towns. Anybody here also follower and knowledgeable of that movement? So they have these priority campaigns, 5 of them. 2 are really, really relevant to what Josh was saying and this conversation. 2, and I see this happening all over the world and the country, and highway expansions. And the other one is incremental housing. So all of these corridors are really ripe with our land use evolution to enable more incremental, call it gentle density in many of these areas, which we want and need to foster. But expanding roads doesn't get us there. So thank you for hearing me out. I don't really have a question. Well, I did have one question. The Kennedy Boulevard section, wasn't that just reworked by FDOT in the last couple of years? I know they've been moving west on Kennedy Boulevard. You know, they're reworking these interchanges so that you sometimes, they're literally forcing U-turns along Kennedy Boulevard. Anybody here ever sit at Bunny Brew Coffee and watch the activity on Kennedy Boulevard? Being forced to make a U-turn, it seems so contrary to our safety ambitions versus what we know decreases crashes and slows speed significantly, which is roundabouts. I don't understand our community and the policymakers' reluctance towards roundabout. Just because it's new and different doesn't mean, I mean, it's not new and different anywhere but in the United States. But even in many American cities, just, you know, try to use your mobile phone for texting in a roundabout. You cannot. You are forced to be engaged in the action of operating your vehicle. And so it's just a great safety tool in our tool chest. I don't see anything here that relates to a system or gives me the sense that there's a system approach. So Kennedy Boulevard was my only question. Thank you.
I was the PM for the Kennedy study from West Shores of the river, and we did look at roundabouts, but the volumes were way too high for the lane calls. So yeah, I share your frustration.
Good comments, Christine. Point, you're right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Johnny, I want to follow up on that comment real quick regarding the traffic counts being too high for the roundabout. Can you just expound upon that for a second?
Yeah, so there are standards by which a roundabout might be warranted, and it comes down to volume. And then if you have multiple lanes, roundabouts are less frequently seen on 4-6 lane roads because the volumes have to be below a certain threshold to ensure that they're not complicating traffic movement. A good example is 40th Street. It has some roundabouts, and it is 4 lanes, 2 northbound, 2 southbound, but the volumes are low enough that the roundabout can handle that traffic load. If you tried to put a roundabout on Kennedy Boulevard with as many cars as it sees, it would actually like complicate traffic movement quite a bit.
Well, I guess I'm just curious who comes up with that, like the threshold there, because obviously I don't think that Americans are dumber than Europeans, but you know, like you go to Paris, like the Arc de Triomphe has a roundabout, you know, it's
Lots of cars there.
lots of cars, lots of people. So I guess I'm just a little curious as to who sets the threshold for when the roundabout is functional or not functional.
A committee of traffic engineers to get like straight to the point. We've had a presentation on roundabouts and warrant criteria offered before. I think Ken Sides delivered it. He's like, according to Ed, Mr. Florida Roundabout. He has a
According to Ed.
He is. Everyone. According to everyone. So I can get in touch with him and see if he'd like to come give that presentation. You all are interested in that.
Are we thinking that a roundabout is better? Much better.
I think that would be a good presentation. Terrence, go ahead. Just a second.
All right, just a couple on the roundabout side. It's weird because I thought we loved roundabouts here in this committee. I'm getting one at my intersection at Sims. I'm excited about it. So I don't see the reluctance to it that you're saying, Christine. I don't necessarily see that.
Not in this committee, I didn't mean that. I meant
Oh,
by
okay.
our policymakers.
All right. I don't think Christine expressed the committee's reluctance. I think she expressed the
Community
reluctance.
and
yeah.
elected.
So we got to keep pushing for those. I agree. And then, so one of the projects in here was like Gibsonton Drive that you guys wanted to, Big Bend. And the justification was as a connector between 75 and 41. Can we include Gibsonton Drive in that? It's like parallel and identical, you know, in function there. It connects 301, 75, and 41. So like, it seems like it fits all the same justifications that Big Bend would fit under.
So one of the challenges that we may run up into is we have to have a study on that corridor. I'll take a look and see if we have anything available on Gibson. If we do, have no qualms about including that for the reasons you suggested. If we don't, we can't confidently say that Gibson would be a good candidate for that kind of treatment, but I'll look into it for you.
Understood, thanks.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, this was a thought that I had that I wasn't going to bring up, but I think it's worth it now that the conversation's gone this way, is it seems like a lot of the focus in this letter is on State Road 60, which everyone may or may not know is a designation put upon a top of other corridors. So it's on top of Kennedy, it's on top of Adamo, and so it's just a designation that the state places for evacuation purposes, for regulations that determine whether or not roundabouts are feasible, in some instances, funding. And so my larger question is, with the fact that it is listed in a lot of segments as a vulnerable corridor, is it not worth discussing, at least bringing up, the redesignation of State Road 60 to somewhere else? Because that is within the state's ability to do, and is also something that would free up State Road 60 to be much more of a pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented corridor, whereas today, that state designation prevents a lot of that from happening. So I think that conversation is perhaps not just limited to State Road 60. We could think about that on parts of US 41, for example, as well. That's a federal level designation, so perhaps a little bit trickier. But under state road designations, I think there's a really good case to be made for reconsidering those designations long term. So I would think that maybe this is a good opportunity to start that conversation in regards to all of the concerns and comments that are in this letter.
It wouldn't be unproductive to initiate that conversation. The context classification definitely limits some of the improvements that you can have, like just because SR 60 is designated as a CIS doesn't mean that DOT would have the ability to just come in and like, hey, lane it between West Shore and Dale Mabry. You know, like they've still got to pay attention to the context class and knowing that that's a highly urbanized corridor.
But it does prevent them from, say, having intersection spacing at a tighter interval than further apart as it is today. It does prevent them from reducing lane widths beyond a maximum size of 12 feet or whatever, and the speed limit of being 40 miles an hour in some places to 25, 30 miles an hour in some places. So I think it's a legacy designation that was made when the county was, much more suburban in its orientation and in its growth patterns and in its thinking. And for not to blame anybody, but that's the way the nation was moving at the time and the practice was. So, but I think it's worth bringing that up because of all those reasons and because of all the headaches that we're seeing because of that, incongruity between an urban fabric and a state road designation that runs through it. I see it in every city that I work in.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. So, but I do think
If I can look into inviting some of the CIS coordinators and CIS planners from DOT, maybe they'd be willing to give a presentation to us later on in the year or early in 2023. I think there's a lot of good comments that I've heard, and I don't know the answers to all of them, but we can invite someone to lend us their ear for an hour or so.
Thank you, Joe. Ed, did you have a question?
I was just going to comment on the roundabout thing. I mean, just like when you design traffic signals, there's some movements that make sense to have leading left turns or things like that. Roundabouts work really well between certain traffic volume levels, and at really high traffic levels, they don't work well. I mean, there's been a lot of scientific research that's gone into studying how roundabouts operate, and there is a range for which it's great, and and we need more of them undoubtedly. But they're also, if you take, Kennedy and Dale Mabry, I mean, there's just too much traffic there. It just wouldn't work. But I mean, there is a range where they're very effective, but they're also, the results of a lot of scientific studies that have gone into designing roundabouts that, wasn't just a bunch of people sitting around the table.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed. Other comments? Rick Fernandez?
Johnny, this may be in your introductory memo, in the agenda and I just missed it. But what is the timeline to get this comment letter out? What are you working against?
September 16th is the last day that DOT is going to accept comments. So we've prepared this draft letter. We're circulating it to some of the committees, asking them to provide feedback, and then we're going to present it to the board next week.
All right, so is the intent at the moment to present the letter as it is appearing on the wall here? Or
No.
making changes to it?
No, this is actually the very first draft. So what was included in your packet was written before we presented it to you all, obviously, before the TAC, Technical Advisory Committee side. We're going to be soliciting comments from you and from them and working them into the letter wherever they're appropriate. So some of the things that we're going to be considering are the suggestions on facilities that could be listed in the CIS cost feasible plan. Do they rank highly among the TPO's list of priorities for like Vision Zero and traffic reliability and resilience? We're going to change the letter today, and it will go into the board packet tonight for mail out to the board. And it could even change before then. So we'll have just this opportunity to give me feedback before the letter that I draft goes to the board for review.
Well, you say that September 16 is the last date the DOT will accept comments, which sounds uniquely, and well, not uniquely, and typically arbitrary to me. Is there something magic about the date, September 16? Could that date be pushed back or forward or whatever?
We asked that, and unfortunately, DOT wasn't willing to extend that. They're soliciting not only comments on the cost feasible plan, but potentially a number of proposals from each of the 27 MPOs. I would imagine that the limitation is going to be state DOT staff time, putting together a list of all the proposals and then drafting them into one plan. So,
okay. So
long story short, I think that they're going to receive a lot of proposals, and they probably want sufficient time to make sure that they get vetted and included.
All right, so we won't have another shot at this letter. If we want to make any further comments to it, it'll have to be in public comment or emails to the board.
Exactly.
And they review it, which would be, what, in October, I guess, right?
No, so next week, or sorry, what did you say?
No, when the board will be asked to act on this letter next week.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, even though that's before September 16. So there would still be time for comments to come in after the board acts, right?
But we wouldn't have the board able to bless those.
Yeah.
So we can receive them, but the board wouldn't be able to direct us to include them in the letter one way or
Unless they held a special meeting or something of that sort for any purpose. God forbid. Okay, I do have a couple of questions about the letter.
Go ahead.
Could you go back to the bullet point that had the crash data?
Yes. Is it this one, or was it about the interchange? The interchanges also has.
It's the general crash data where you talked about how many accidents there were per mile.
Yes.
For CIS facilities.
Right here.
That one, that's how it is there?
Yeah.
Middle of
For
the screen?
CIS facilities.
I'll move it to the top, so it's the top paragraph.
For CIS facilities, okay.
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you this, because of course I've become DTI man here on this committee, so let me just put that t-shirt on for a minute. I didn't see anywhere in this letter that the downtown interchange was specifically called out. Did I miss something? Or if it isn't called out specifically, why isn't it called out specifically?
That project's already underway, so it was removed from the cost feasible plan. It's under construction, as you know. The cost feasible plan takes a look at projects that could receive funding within a timeline of 11 to 25 years. So it's looking out in the future. DTI will definitely be done before then.
Okay. All right, I guess that answered my question. All right, thank you.
Other questions about the letter, the presentation? Any questions from our online, I'm sorry, Floyd Federal's.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I have a kind of a general question here, because there are some things in here project-wise that I would certainly move to take out, but I'm also considering that, you know, we're not voting on, you know, TIP amendments or LRTP amendments at this time, as I understand it. So is there a way perhaps that we could at least request the TPO board, they can do what they want, to include commentary of the CAC within the letter as it relates to a few of these projects? Because if so, then I'm likely to make a motion to do some of that, because it may be lengthy given all the what Mr. Frank has, and probably Rick and you know, myself might want to include in there as a vote. So
I would say put the motion forward and see what the committee thinks. If you agree, if the committee votes to include some CAC narrative and the board agrees, I'd be happy to put it in.
all right, well, I'm going to take a first crack then. So I would like to move. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Okay.
You're still ready.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to move to note following that it's the opinion of the CAC that the I-275 managed lane project from Lowest Avenue to the Hillsborough River should be removed from the TIP. And that is also the position of the Tampa City Council when they voted on it unanimously in the last couple of years. I would also like to make a note that it's the CAC's position that the I-275 widening north of Hillsborough Avenue was removed from the TIP by the TPO board. And then I would also like to make a note that to kind of follow up what Christine said, that that FDOT should look at the systems process more holistically outside of just moving cars and vehicles, and that they should also, when they're looking at these safety projects, try to do things that minimize negative impacts to surrounding properties, such as right-of-way acquisition for things like ramp metering or others. I would also be willing to entertain, because I bet you probably have some suggestions of what you would like. Would it be acceptable for Josh to make a comment on that, and then I will make a motion that includes both of those comments?
Okay, well, we'll put your motion on hold and let Josh see if he has any suggestions. Is that what
Basically, I want him to make the suggestions. I will adopt them as part of my motion, because I suspect we will agree.
A little irregular, but we'll do that. Josh, you want to make your comment?
Yeah, I suppose so. If I'm adding to the menu, I think it's important that
These comments are being made as proposed additions to Hoyt's.
yes, right. I would say that it's also important that FDOT recognize and honor the commitment to the equity and non-discrimination commitment. That's redundant. Excuse my grammar. And also to the same effect, honor the commitments made towards Vision Zero, which eliminates crashes, not just for cars, but pedestrians and cyclists, and other mobility options.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I have another one, but it hasn't been, there's nothing to it, so that's all right.
So, Cory, are you including those
Yes,
two recommendations in your motion?
yes, Mr. Chair, I include those recommendations in my proposed motion.
So we have a motion from Mr. Prindle to include a number of recommendations to come from this committee. Is there a second to the motion?
No discussion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Christine, have a second? A motion and a second. Terrence, do you have discussion?
Yes. So it was my impression that the things that we do when it comes to any project, we're looking at, see if it's Vision Zero, walkable, livable, rideable walkways. Are we going away from that? Because again, every time a project comes up, should we have the assumption that the engineers are designing it with pedestrians and cyclists in mind as well.
That would be a bad assumption to make. It's CAC and TPO staff's responsibility to make sure that if they have overlooked the needs of anyone, that we bring it to their attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that, so, you know, like it's illegal to ride your bike on the interstate, it's illegal to walk. So we don't really have to consider their needs when we're talking about managed lane, except for the entry points and exit points, like on and off ramps, where those two modes would, forgive the expression, but collide. So those are the key areas where we consider the needs of pedestrians and cyclists with respect to the interstate.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So I mean, in scenario A, we're designing an intersection. People have to cross that. Cyclists, we have to consider as well. And you're saying that is not included in the designs?
I'm not saying that. I don't think that any of these have gone to design. Speaking generally, if someone from any agency comes to us and makes a presentation on a project on interstate, arterial, regardless of the facility, if we recognize that they have overlooked the need of some mode, we should definitely bring that to their attention and ask them to reconsider. There's no design for any of these projects. Again, these are in the queue for 11 to 25 years out into the future. So the way that we have tackled the issue that you're bringing up is by asking DOT, when it comes time to design this project, make sure you take a look at high visibility crosswalks. Make sure you take a look at speed management strategies. Make sure you look at access management as a reminder that those needs are important, and when it comes time to consider them, keep those in the forefront.
100% concur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other discussion on the motion? Anyone online care to comment on the motion? All right, we have a motion by Hoyt Prindle and a second to include a series of recommendations. I counted possibly 5 groups, but I won't belabor the point. Josh, did you have a further comment?
No, I was saying it was 5.
Okay, 5, okay, I've got 5. I think we could do this by voice vote, if the committee agrees. So all those in favor of the motion to make these 5 recommendations to the TPO board as part of the furtherance of this letter, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And I'm sure that Cheryl has recorded all of those points with extreme accuracy at this point. We still have an action item before us, which is the recommendation or action on the letter itself, given the fact that we've taken these steps. Is there a motion to recommend the letter be forwarded on with our comments to the TPO board?
So moved.
Hoyt Prindle makes a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Terrence Trott, second the motion. Any further discussion on the recommendation of the letter with our comments attached? Seeing none, is there any comment online? All right, seeing none and hearing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the letter, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the motion passes with no opposition. Thank you, Johnny.
Chair, can I clarify who was the first and second?
Hoyt Prindle made the motion and Terrence Trott made the second. Good discussion.
All right, thanks.
All right. And the next item on our agenda is also a presentation by Dr. Wong, CAC Organizational Structure.
Just on time today.
Don't change that. 4 minutes early.
Yeah, we're screwed now.
No, I'll keep it brief. Johnny Wong, CPO staff, going to brief you on some proposals that we have brainstormed in conjunction with the conversations we had at the CAC and the survey results from the general public. I think this is the third time that we brought this presentation to you. Last meeting, several of you asked that we just stop beating around the bush and come with some proposals to have them voted up or down. So that is what I have done. I'll quickly recap the purpose of these proposals. Again, we're proposing that we make some modifications to the structure of the committee regarding membership, number of seats, time of day, format of the meeting. The general reason why we're exploring changes to the current system is that when the non-discrimination and equity plan was approved by this committee and the board some years ago, there were recommendations that pertain specifically to the committee structure. The first is to increase accessibility to meetings. Second is to meet people where they are. And the third is to evaluate ways to improve representation on committees by adding new seats, removing some seats, and removing barriers to membership. So for all the issues that I just mentioned, I'm going to present a slide on each and quickly explain the justification for each of the proposed changes. So I think that this one had near consensus that we should change the meeting start time to the evening to allow for folks who work during the day and can't get away to participate. I heard some say 5 p.m. I think that was the time that we originally brought forward. Some of you said, no, I'd rather have an hour to go home, wash my face, and then come back down here. So I think 6 o'clock was the near consensus. So we're suggesting that the meeting begin at 6 and end at 9 p.m., allowing members to get home from work and then begin the meeting. Also to allow for travel times from those who are coming from very north and south of the county. The meeting formats, I think that there was a strong consensus to continue with the hybrid meetings. Some of you advocated for an attendance requirement or quota, or sorry, a limit to how many times folks could take advantage of attending virtually. I'll touch on that topic in a second, but a preview is that we don't agree, staff doesn't agree with setting an in-person attendance requirement. I'll explain why in a second. But an alternative around that to help encourage in-person participation would be to continue exploring tech that can make it easier for virtual attendees to feel like they're in the room. And nothing is off the table. We have a budget for computers, so we can explore adding cameras and providing them to folks who have a very long travel distance and can't get in the room. We have the OWL, which broadcasts your face onto the meeting platform whenever you speak. So you can't see the GoToWebinar right now, but because I'm talking, it's showing me. We can explore digital whiteboards that might help facilitate presentation. And I've heard from a number of you that GoToWebinar just isn't a good platform. I agree, don't tell the tech team. We can explore things like WebEx, Zoom. There are a number of others that make it feel more like you're participating. You may notice, like right now, we can't see the face of anyone who's logged in virtually. So there are a number of ways that we can address that. All right, before I get to the continuation of that topic, we are suggesting that we expand membership from what it currently is, 21 to 30 seats in total, 15 based on demographic characteristics. These are all goals with a cap at 30 members. We're not going to be able to hit these percentages exactly, but we should strive to hit them. So our goal is to have 50% of those 15 members median income or below. The goal to have 50% female membership of those 15, so 7.5. Hispanic, goal of 30% of the seats. African American, a goal of 20% of those seats. Asian American, a goal of 5%. Persons 30 or younger, a goal of 15%. And persons with disabilities, also a goal of 15%. To hit those numbers, we're going to have to be in constant recruiting mode. We're going to have to be very selective about the members that we bring into the committee. Frequently, we're going to have members hitting a number of these demographic characteristics. So a person 30 years or younger who's Asian American, myself 7 years ago. A person who is African American and Hispanic could potentially fill 2 of those seats or fill or meet 2 of those goals for reservation. So that's half of the committee makeup, 15 based on demography, 15% on geographic residence and geography where they're located in the county. We have devised what we think is the best balance. We've created 15 districts across the county. Each of the districts has about 100,000 residents each. So it's kind of hitting the population equity point. The first district will be comprised of Town and Country, 12 Oaks, and Lido. Second is West Tampa, Egypt Lake, Lowry Park, West Shore, Beach Park. Third, it's South Tampa. Fourth, downtown, Tampa Heights, Ybor, Palmetto Beach, Palm River. Fifth, Brandon Main Street, Mango, the Fairgrounds, the Notasasa. 6, Progress Village, Providence Road, Kings Road, and Boyette corridors. 7, Bell Shoals, Durant, Fishhawk, Lithia, Fort Lonesome. 8, Plant City, central and southern parts of the city. Hopewell, Sydney, and Dover. 9, Tampa Palms, southern portion of it, Pebble Creek, Knights, and the northeast corner of Plant City. 10, Temple Terrace, Busch Gardens, the USF area, and Livingston corridor up in Boots. 11, East Tampa, Seminole Heights, Sulphur Springs, and then Forest Hills. 12, Carrollwood, Lake Magdalene, Lutz, North Tampa Palms. 13th would be Citrus Park, West Chase, and Keystone. 14th, Riverview, Panther Trace, and Waterset. 15, Ruskin, Sun City Center, and Waimama. The way I understand this is going to be confusing, so bear with me for a second. So we have done our best to balance the population and the kind of like characteristics of each of those districts to make sure we're not lumping together various parts of the county that may have very disparate transportation interests, and they may have very different transportation issues affecting them. For those of you serving on this committee now, those appointed by elected officials, those appointed by an agency, HART, Port, Airport Via, you would have first priority to occupy those seats. So you don't have to go anywhere. You can occupy the seat that covers the area or covers the service area of the agency that you represent now. If there are multiple members living in a part of the community that needs representation, we could potentially expand this from 15 seats to 30 to make sure that everyone has a place on the committee if they want that. So in short, anyone currently serving who wants to continue will receive priority in their geographic areas. If there are a number of you residing from the same geographic area, we could expand the geographic seats from 15 to 30. If that still doesn't work, like let's say there are 3 of you from the same district, one of you could apply for a demographic seat and occupy that. Sounds confusing, but staff level, we understand how this could work out very well. It'll be an interesting puzzle to resolve, but we're committed to doing that. Meeting locations. I heard this comment from a number of you, and we've explored it for other committees and the board doing like field trips. We think that it would be best to do this as an optional social event. It would be publicly noticed, but you all could have input on how we structure the agenda. You can talk about whatever issues you want. It would be a little less formal than the meetings we have in this room. We're kind of struggling with issues of tech support, so if we host this at an off-site location, our staff won't be able to set up all of this technology to make the meetings function as well as they do here. We may rely on HTV or some other shared resource to fill that gap, but we'll have to discuss that. All right, so the continuation, time to talk about the attendance requirements. When we present this to the board, staff is not going to recommend in-person attendance. We think that by expanding the membership and expanding the geography of where the members are coming from and having 50% of the demographic seats being reserved for median income or lower folks, it would be just another barrier to participation if we force in-person attendance. We're hoping that we can improve the meeting quality so that virtual attendees feel like they're participating no differently than anyone in the room. On top of that, the transit reliant community is going to really struggle if they're coming from the furthest ends of our county, and evening bus service may not be available to all of those areas. Plant City, for example, I don't think our service in that area. We're going to explore reimbursements for members who are below median income because they're going to be dedicating their time to this. And in the evening, we're going to explore ways that we can provide some remuneration. The last part of this attendance requirement is that we're going to propose that we keep the quorum at 7 in person. The idea being that if we improve the technology and allow virtual participation to feel more real, we shouldn't have a problem generating good conversation, having a number of diverse perspectives presented at every meeting or controversial issues. Term limits, I don't have a strong inclination of how you all feel about them. I got a number of mixed responses. Therefore, we're going to recommend some term limits, but regarding the actual number of years that someone can serve, it can be quite a few. So we're proposing that we're going to limit terms to 3 of 2 years. So that right off the bat is 6 years. And when you're termed out, we're going to leave the opportunity for you to fill another position. So if currently you're representing a geographic district, at the end of 6 years, you really want to serve, you love it that much, you can go apply for a demographic seat. We're going to enhance our onboarding and review the performance of those who serve on the board or serve on this committee so that we continue to have a fresh influx of invigorated community members. We want to make sure that as the county's transportation perspectives mature, that the committee members match that. We don't want this committee to get stale. We want to make sure that everyone's participating. Gearing up for a lot of questions and discussion. Before I get to that, put all the recommended actions on this one slide for you to consider. So these are the changes that we're proposing, hoping that you'll agree and forward them to the TPO board. Changing the start time to 6 p.m., maintaining hybrid meeting format, committee composed of 30 members, 15 for underrepresented demographic groups, 15 for districts, post optional meetings around the county twice per year, maintaining the quorum at 7 in person, and limiting terms to 3 of 2, with the option for members to apply to different positions at the end of their term. All right, and I'll be stretching my right again. Take comment whenever you're ready to get.
I'm sure that there will be, yeah, I'm sure there'll be no comment. It's true. Ed, you're recognized.
Yeah, I've got a half a dozen, but I'm sure there's going to be tons and they're going to be duplicates. So I'm just going to limit myself to 2.
Okay.
Does that mean that the MPO member appointees and the agency appointees will be no more?
Yes, so the seats reserved for FIA, neighborhoods, women, you know, we've like added that goal of having 50%. Hearts, airport, seaport, those will go away. But again, the members currently serving those positions, you're going to have right of first refusal to occupy a geographic district. So I don't know where you live at, but if you want to occupy the district, you'd be free to do that. You'll no longer be considered a FIA appointee. You'll just be Ed from your neighborhood.
Okay. I'll give somebody else a chance.
Okay. Josh?
Yeah, I have 3. So I've got it
beat by one in this limiting. I think a couple things. One is I think the 15-15 split I think is a bit restrictive in terms of the underrepresented demographic groups. It leaves a little bit of an open door for somebody who may not apply to either, for example, in at least the first couple years while we're sort of adjusting to that. So I would suggest that maybe there's a transitional period where you have 5 at-large seats as sort of a catch-all. So for example, if I don't I have a duplicate in my district and I don't meet any of the other qualifications, I don't get left out of that process and transition. I think that's maybe a bit more fair, and that could sunset, and they could, as each of those at large goes away, it converts into a different demographic, whatever. So I think that is an easier way to transition. I think also, not just because of my age, but I think 30 and under is a bit optimistic to hit. I think it may make sense to bump that to 35 and under. I think typically that's sort of what young professional category is considered as 35 and under. And I think it just casts a wider net. I don't think there's that much difference between 30 and 35. I sit in the middle of 33, so maybe I'm biased. But in any case, I think that helps that seat a bit. And then I think also, rather than I appreciate the thought of expanding to 60, I think that's a bit crazy, personally, to try and get a consensus among 60 people, and that meetings would probably last 6 hours. But I do think, though, it would be worth, in order to achieve the level of continuity and experience in complicated matters like the TIP, for example, that we're looking to achieve, while also starting to incorporate more diversity and more opinions, is to have alternates and have the board members themselves select the alternates so that they can either communicate with them and have them in their place if they're unable to make it, so they at least get some exposure to the process and the board, but also to help in the process of finding new voices, right? As they're no longer being appointed by an elected official, the question of who becomes a board member is then relied upon by staff. And so as a really easy way for staff to get to know that district a little bit better, perhaps having an alternate as a number 2 and an immediate successor would make a lot of sense, and at least provide a new or a new method of connectivity for staff into those districts, rather than just relying on word of mouth or somebody to recommend from outside. It may be difficult for you to advertise and find somebody, for example, in a district, but it would be easier for somebody in that existing district to recommend somebody to you to then vet and go through the process with. So I think those are my 3 comments, and I'll leave it to everyone all right.
All right, thank you. Yes, Christina.
Christina, okay. I have 3 also. My first question is, I agree with going up to 35 with Josh for age, but what happens when they age out? Are they off? If I was 30 years old and I applied, now in 6 months I'm 31, or next year I'm 31, am I out of that seat and have to look for another one? That would be my question. Do they get a little, that's good. Okay, so that's my first question. The second question is, why wasn't over 65 included in the demographic? Because we have very specific needs, transportation needs, and I think we may not be underrepresented in the county, but we could potentially be underrepresented on this board, and I think I would like to see that as a demographic. And my last question is, would it still go before the board for approval? Or does staff just approve them, or would they still have to go?
The board would have to approve any recommendations that staff offer.
For people, right?
Because we're going to have to change the bylaws to implement these changes. And then when we're recruiting new members, there might be a way to expedite that process and have them adopted by like consent agenda at the board. But the candidates that are selected would be vetted by staff rather than brought forward to the committee. In past years, when we needed to fill a seat, we would come up with a list of maybe like 5 applicants and bring them before this committee. Each would give a short presentation on who they are, what their interests are. That was like a really long and unnecessary process, I think. So the vetting and all of that would happen internal. CPO staff would be responsible for that.
Is that your three?
That's it.
Okay, Rick Fernandez, you're recommending.
Thanks, Chair. Well, not to bury the lead, I won't be supporting this whole hog when the vote comes up. There are a couple of items on your suggested recommended actions that I'd be fine with individually, changing the start time to 6, maintain hybrid meeting format, and I've got my issues with that, but I understand it's become more of a norm now, and it can be monitored and policed, I think, so it can be effective. Maintaining the quorum of 7, we seem to be functional doing that. The rest of it, no. The why of it, well, a couple of questions, first of all. I think maybe you just responded to this from my colleague's question. So if I understand correctly now, all authority for appointments is going to be ceded from this committee for at-large appointments and the board for all the other appointments. It's all going to be ceded to staff. Staff is going to be responsible for making all of the appointments that then go to the board for approval. That's what you are effectively proposing, correct?
So what we're proposing is for you all to buy into the rules by which we have to operate. So if you agree that reserving 15 seats to hit the demographic or the representative demographics of the county is something that you value, you kind of put the responsibility on staff to vet, make sure we're recruiting the right people. And if we are, we will present them to the board saying, here's why we think this person's a good candidate to fill this seat, according to the rules that you all adopted into the bylaws and the CAC agreed with. So it's not us making a unilateral decision. It's you empowering us to make those decisions by the rules that we all agree to.
Right, if we choose to seat that authority. Right, okay. Are there any other advisory committees that are being, given this level of love and attention? Is there some reason we're uniquely being called out for this?
The non-discrimination plan focused mostly on the CAC because in the eval, they saw that we haven't even come close to approaching the demographic breakdown of the county. I think that we're getting closer, but we're nowhere near 50% female representation, nowhere near 30% Hispanic representation. They focused on adding those demographic seats and removing the ones at the at-large Hartport Airport because those seats are represented on the TAC. So it's not that the voice of Hart Airport Port are going away, but they already have a vote on the technical advisory. And same with the elderly population, they have a voice on transportation disadvantage. So we're trying to restructure the CAC to make it a little bit more citizen oriented.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to make a proposal to you, not in the form of a motion at this point. But, and what is being proposed here to us is a wholesale revamp of our Citizens Advisory Committee, a committee that I generally felt was held in pretty high regard by the board and that we've been pretty effective working together over time. And this morning was a great example. We had a very sophisticated conversation about some pretty high level stuff. And these changes that you're suggesting, I think is going to gut us, is what's going to happen. Before we consider a wholesale revamp, how about we simply consider doing a better job of managing the system we have? For instance, you said we had 20 members on this committee. Well, when I looked at the Citizens Advisory Committee attendance report, I see 23 line items on that Excel spreadsheet. So I'm thinking we actually have 23 seats to fill on this committee as it currently sits, not 20, but 23. Of course, we've had attendance problems. over the last few weeks, today being an exception. But of those seats, 4 of them are vacant. And they've been vacant a long time. For instance, the neighborhood's member at large has been vacant all year. Women, vacant all year. I remember our last, what was her name? Amy Espinoza was our last person to fill that seat. We've taken no action, and women supposedly are a group we want to represent demographically. We want to represent a group demographically by way of age. Well, our under 30 representative, we haven't seen him since the fall. Today, I think maybe his 6th absence in a rural context where supposedly 3 or more you're supposed to be gone. So how about we get rid of the people that apparently are not committed to us, get people on board that are, fill the seats that have been vacant forever and a day for no good reason, and be consistent in our decisions in terms of the demographics that we're trying to fill. I mean, if you're trying to fill an at-large position for women, well, we know we have some demographics we want to look at for that. But we're going to be making that appointment, not you. It'll be us. And that's the way it sits now, and I think it's the way it ought to stay, but we ought to be doing a better job of policing ourselves and a better job also of making recommendations to the board as to who actually sits here and for how long these seats are allowed to remain vacant, either actually or de facto by a person who continues to fill the seat but never arrives, and then we don't take any action to remove them. So I think we can get closer to the goals that you've stated in this project that you've put forward to us by simply using the goal-setting tools that you've given us and fill the 23 seats that we have consistent with that. If we want to add, maybe we add some at-large members. I do not like the idea of the committee appointments being made or the vetting being done by staff alone. I don't like that at all. I don't like the fact that we're being disconnected from the electeds and the other members of the TPO board in terms of being appointing authorities. I think that's important that this board continue to have some relationship to that board. And frankly, when you get beyond 30 people, or even when you get to 30 people, you're talking about a town hall meeting. You're not talking about a committee. And that's going to be extremely unwieldy. I can't even imagine what the chair is going to be doing, trying to chair that kind of committee. So anyway, as I say, this has my wholehearted non-endorsement. And I hope we'll just maybe look at trying to do a better job of what we have.
Can I respond, Rick? So you're right, we do have a number of tools at the disposal of the committee to administer the meetings a little bit better. Since the committee requested it, we've attached the attendance roster in the agenda packet for each meeting. It's not a rule that after 3 absences, they are removed. It's at the discretion of the committee to vote those members out. So if you see the red box around a member who hasn't shown up, you don't know what they look like, everyone is free to make the motion to remove them. So that's the first thing. The second problem is that I understand where you're coming from. You feel a little uneasy at granting TPO staff the discretion to evaluate candidates, but let me pose it to you in a slightly different way. One issue that came up in the non-discrimination plan is, let's say we have to fill a seat for a representative of the African-American community. There's 21, 23 members on this committee. In theory, 22 of them could be non-African American. Why should those 22 members decide which candidate best represents the needs of the African American community? It's kind of taking the power away from the community that needs representation. Same with the small business community, same with the Hispanic community. And so allowing TPO staff to vet committee members would do a better job of ensuring that that process isn't led by people that don't represent the community.
Well, that's a matter of opinion, but okay.
Christine?
I just had a clarifying question. So I heard you list the agencies that would no longer have a delegate here, but are you also saying that the elected officials would also not have delegates here? I mean, per se?
I think that we would use them as a recruiting mechanism. So if they have a candidate in mind that they think would help us meet the goals for demography and geography, we would certainly welcome their input and seriously consider that. That would actually make it easier on us so that we don't have to recruit from the district to try to find a candidate if they have.
But as a matter of policy, it
Right.
no longer.
I think it would probably be a coordinated decision.
Let's go.
So first, I want to say I completely agree with Rick. Then I got a couple questions. So you said that TPO staff can do a better job making sure we hit those demographic goals. What exactly makes you all think that we can't do that? If you pass out like a sheet of paper that summarizes what those goals are, what we currently have, who the applicants are for what seat, why couldn't we make that decision just the same as you?
If you want to occupy committee time doing that, I have no problem with it. In the past, it's been a very lengthy process. And just some months ago, you all asked me to limit the amount of action and status items on the agenda because we were consistently going over, but like 30 minutes to an hour. I think if we were to retain that responsibility among the committee members themselves, it could get very difficult. Yes, I mean, that's probably the number one reason. It's just time intensive.
And then I believe at a previous meeting, you said that you had a backlog of applicants that wanted to be on this committee. Have you all looked and seen what kind of demographics they would fill, again, with the current openings, or if we remove people who missed like 6, 7, 8? You said there was one person who hasn't been here since last fall. Why is this person still here? Maybe we should start every meeting with that attendance list and we can vote them out. That way we know what needs to be filled. If we have that kind of backlog, I don't think we need to restructure everything. It kind of seems like we can reach into that and get those demographics filled.
I think that's a good idea, opening up the meeting by reviewing the attendance roster. It's included in the agenda packet. Like I said, that motion has to come from committee members. If you seek to remove folks who consistently aren't participating and they've missed it 3 or more, I have no problem with that. I don't think that would present a challenge for Bill to getting through the agenda.
Well, can we start to put it on the actual agenda, like maybe under section 8, unfinished business and new business? That way it's consistently on there, so when we keep seeing the problem, we can address it every month and not wait until we have a backlog of attendance issues.
I don't have any problem with that.
What I would say though,
Yes, go ahead.
the only thing I will say is, wasn't the July meeting not a meeting?
That was optional.
Yeah, that one was optional. Yeah. Sorry, I wanted to touch on one other thing. So yeah, you're right. There have been a number of vacancies. When we first floated this idea to the committee, we proposed holding off on appointing new members until we figured out how to land this issue and if there would be any changes to the membership structure and quorum and all of that. This conversation has been delayed a few times. We were hoping to wrap it up by midsummer. We're now like way past the deadline. So maybe in retrospect, the decision not to fill those vacancies presented a little bit of a challenge, but we weren't thinking of implementing the changes until maybe early 2023. So if the conversation lands somewhere today and then the board approves it, they would amend the bylaws in October. We could start recruiting through November and December. If you all want to maintain your seats, you could help us fill those geographic seats that are reserved. And then hopefully we come with a new batch of members in January or February of next year. I do think that there will be a lot of continuity. I would assume that most of you want to retain your seats. So you would probably volunteer to fill those geographic seats.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the absence issue, one thing I was going to suggest maybe to help us kind of deal with this issue, like in federal court, for example, when somebody doesn't follow the rules, the judge often hits them with what's called an order to show cause, which basically says you have so many days to explain why you didn't follow the rules or your motion, your case, whatever is denied. You think maybe we could send the people that have 4 or more absences, just have staff send them an email or a letter and say, hey, you've got this many absences, why, and can you give us an explanation on why you want to stay on the board?
Yeah.
And I suspect that the people that don't respond, then we have an easy decision to just boot them. I mean, I I'm certainly for kind of cleaning up some of the things with people that don't want to show up. You know, I'm reluctant to maybe not give them a chance to explain themselves or try to say maybe why, you know, the speaker had illness or something.
Yeah, we do send out emails when members have missed 3 meetings in a row. Usually send them an email just to touch base. You'll say something like, hey, I hope you're doing okay. We haven't seen you in a little bit. Just a reminder that you missed 3 meetings, and according to the bylaws, the committee could take action to remove you. Remember that your attendance affects the quorum. We'd love to have you participate. Please let me know, do you still have time to serve, or should we look at replacing? And most of the time, they will say, yes, I'm sorry, I just got busy, and they'll attend the next meeting. You all may decide not to take action. Some of them that have missed an egregious number of meetings, especially if they're appointed by a body or an elected official, will contact the official directly, let them know, hey, the person you assigned hasn't been seen all year, can you appoint a replacement? But again, like the decision to remove by vote should be initiated by the committee. So we've attached that attendance report for you all to review. I haven't taken the liberty to like call attention to it, but if you flip to that page in the packet, you'll see there are several folks that have missed 3, 4, maybe more consecutive meetings.
Well, and some of them have been pretty active members in the past. Like, I don't know if David Bailey's on the call, but like he was somebody that was pretty active on this committee historically. So, you know, it's a little concerning when you just start show up.
I touch base very gently with people who have missed, but
I'm actually on the call. I don't know if you knew I just showed up late, but I am on the call. This is David Bailey.
David, good to have you.
We miss you in person, David.
I miss you guys too. Hopefully beginning next month or November, I should be back in person. So it's just work kind of has taken me out of the area on our meeting date. So it's just kind of hard to be there in the person for the next 2 months.
Good to have you with us. Ed, you're recognized.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to comment on the geographic areas. I would ask you to relook at some of those because I look at, to me, it seems like West Shore and Beach Park would much more identify with South Tampa. And I don't see where Carroll would identify with North Tampa Palms or Forest Hills with East Tampa. Somehow or other, I just feel like I would ask you to take a closer look at grouping some of those in a real geographic way. And I think ultimately, if we're going to apply to be on some of those seats, I think you're going to need to delineate an actual map that shows what each of those districts are. And then the other comment I'd make is say, you know, I actually feel pretty comfortable with the staff vetting candidates, particularly if they're going to ultimately be approved by the MPO. And in fact, I have some concern in the past with the way we have selected members. I think there's been cases where people have been not allowed to become on because I think there's an ability, if we select new members, to select people that we know are going to agree with our point of view. And I think that's.
Yes, Christine.
Yes, I'd just like to go on the record to say that I prefer the geographic and demographic makeup of the committee for a number of reasons, and for one very personal reason. I was appointed by an elected official. My elected official is running for office. Should she lose the election in November, I'm gone. You know, you could only having served for a little over a year and finally getting up to speed. So I do prefer this as opposed to having elected officials.
Good point. Yes, Josh, just a second.
Yeah, I have a couple extra thoughts now that, you know, allow us to digest a little bit. You know, I think I hear Rick's point, and I think he's right in a lot of ways. So I do think, though, it might be worth kind of going through these one by one, potentially as a recommended action rather than approving any or all of them together. But I'll save that for later. I think that the geographic representation is a little bit problematic because it's arbitrary. You could draw an infinite number of shapes on a map that represent 100,000 people. I know you try to group them by relative, you know, neighborhoods. and that makes some sense, but I think you could do that a lot of different ways. And so for me, the geographic representation is the elected officials. They represent the geographic area, right, each district. And so I think that perhaps there is a common ground where you can have geographic representation via the elected officials with some caveats that say, you know, if somebody appoints somebody and then is no longer in their seat, that person can then stay through to a new elected official until they're so sunsetted or whatever. But I do think that there is, like I said, a common ground of having that geographic representation and also having the underrepresented demographic groups. And if we were to just pause that for a second and think we've got 16 members that are appointed on this board. I just went down the list. I'm assuming this is all of them, not including the planning commission's position. If we just set those 16 as the geographic representatives and or the school board and the board and all the other agencies, and did a 15-seat for underrepresented demographics, we're at 31, which is really not that much different than the 30 you're proposing, and accomplishes a lot of the same goals and keeps the position of having the appointees, which as unrepresented are basically at large for this board to appoint, as to Rick's point, and also the elected officials to appoint, so that the power is not necessarily all on staff, it's not all on the board, it's a little bit of both, and makes a little bit more sense that way. And I think that if we were to do that, just looking at the vacancy report, and if we were diligent with the vacancies and the absenteeism and all of that, even though I hear Rick's point about the 30 members being more of a town hall, we've got 23 now and no more than 16, 17 showing up to begin with. So I think, if anything, the likelihood of having all 31 people show up is pretty small. And if it's in a hybrid format, we've got some folks online, we can always vote to not have them participate online and vote online if it becomes so large and so problematic. But what I would say is that as a course of action for today, because we could probably debate this for a long time, I think we should probably look at the ones that I think there's probably consensus around: the meeting start time, the hybrid format, perhaps maintaining the quorum, the term limits, perhaps even, and start to break those out and start to at least make some improvements now, and then come back to and table and think about the reapportionment part of this, you know, once we can take a shot at making what we have work a little bit better.
Could I counter and offer that if you all agree that the demographic seats make sense, those are based on just census statistics, so we match those exactly. If you all agree that the district idea is worthwhile to explore, but don't feel comfortable with the way we've drawn them up, maybe agree to that in principle now for, just say, about 15 seats for districts, and then next month we can come back and show you all the options we came up with, because we sliced and diced the county 16 different ways, and we tried to pick the ones that made the most sense. But if you all are up for it, we can come back and present all 16 options to you and decide at the next meeting.
John, are you suggesting?
This is,
Go ahead, who's online?
I'm sorry, this is Artie Fryer, I'm online. I just want to make a comment. I think the backdrop, if I'm understanding this, and the impetus was this non-discrimination plan. So I want to talk about geography first. I'm not so troubled by what you have there, and John, is your comment about revisiting that is okay. But I think it's important for us to understand that in this geographical area, in this community, it may be useful to just use what you have here, even if it doesn't look exactly alike. Some of this whole process of what this group does is to cause individuals who live in different geographical areas and who also have different cultures and such, is to mingle on a specific issue. So if we're going to use the geographical framework, that may have some usefulness. keeping in mind we're talking about this non-discrimination plan as the impetus toward this. I think we just need to continue to look at that. That's one thing. The other thing is I represent the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board. And I think the comment was made in regard to persons over 65. That board includes persons with disabilities, persons 65 and older and such. I think persons with disability in regard to transportation are a specific and unique group to this committee. And I think representatives, because on the Transportation Disadvantage Board, we have persons who are sight challenged and other things that bring a different kind of perspective to all of the conversations. So if we're going to try to make sure we're touching on people who this non-discrimination plan impacts, I hope we don't disregard those persons who really are impacted by transportation issues. And I'll just quickly end this. We talked about crash instances and such. Those persons with disabilities and such are likely prone to those kind of problems. So I'm okay with making some adjustments to improve what we're doing, but I think we want to make sure we don't discriminate in our efforts to try and do something well. So just want to leave that as something for us to keep into consideration as we're moving forward. I think there's some things that we can decide to do, and I think that comment has already been made. But I just want us to keep in mind what was the impetus for us to have this discussion to begin with.
Thank you, Artie.
Thanks, Artie. We have, so yeah, we do have a goal of 15% of persons with disabilities. That would be about 2.5 seats. So either 2 or 3 members would fill that need.
Yes, go ahead.
Are we worried that if we change the format and don't have people being put into the position, that it will not be heard as loudly or listened to? You know what I mean? The fact that, I mean, what Josh said really did resonate with me. If a elected official appointed you, then really that is the community. So it's like, that is kind of your community leader has appointed you, and then you have other appointees, and then you have members at large, right? So if we take away the community leaders, then that, I just worry, does it kind of hurt the actual committee?
Yeah, I hear your concern. The non-discrimination plan addresses that by just mentioning that since the board is the elected officials, they have the ultimate power. The CAC advises them to make sure that all the voices are represented and that they are able to let the board members know what issues are troubling them. It ultimately falls on the board to make those decisions, but I think the reason why this would help the long-term health of the CAC is because we're going to be playing a more active role in ensuring that the voices that are never represented are, and that they have a seat on the committee, and not just limiting it to folks who are kind of handpicked by the elected officials.
But then I guess I would say, do you think you're gonna be able to find them though? Do you feel like people are knocking down the door to get in here?
I think it's going to be a challenge. We're definitely going to be in constant recruiting mode, but we have staff that are committed to it. I'm willing to make myself available, always have. We have 4 members of our outreach team that know the community very well and have connections already. The remuneration is going to help, of course, attract folks who are low, median income. It's going to be a challenge, but staff will definitely be able to handle it.
Terry Scott, you're right.
Chairman, can I make a comment? This is David Bailey, if I may.
Yes, David, go ahead.
I would just like to say I actually like the idea of just making the change. I think this definitely, especially will provide representation, especially doing it on a demographic basis. I like the geographic delineations. Also, I do think that the staff would do, I wouldn't say a better job, but I think it's man hours better spent if they take on that while we focus on issues that we need to focus on. So if they have the ability to take on that from us, why not let them do it? I also like the fact that changing the time, I think I heard someone mention that we don't have enough people showing up during the day or during our current meetings. Perhaps changing the time, adding more members, this will provide better attendance for our meetings. So I like the changes. I think we're on the right track. Can there be some adjustments made? Absolutely. But I think this is something that's leading us down the right road. So I like the changes and look forward to any adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Terrence Trott.
Thanks, Dr. Wong. This is good stuff, man. Appreciate you and the staff listening to what we wanted to do with demographics and equity and everything like that, plus what we're trying to infuse in all operations. So appreciate that. But the term limits, can we just have you fill your term so that way, like if your demographic changes, you go from 30 to 31 or 34, 35, 36, you finish your term. I mean, it's not like, I don't see how we're losing that much. Or even if you move from one area to the other, like, okay, so you're on the board out of the area for a year. I don't see that as a huge problem. Not like all your priorities are going to change or something. I don't know. So if you just had term limits where you get to finish your term, and it's only 2-year terms, right? Yeah, I think that would be okay. I'd like to see the over 65 added. I'd like the young people to stay at 30. Like, I'm 40 something, and 30 wasn't even young. You know what I mean? Like that's old. Like, we're not getting that USF representation necessarily from a college kid, or somebody that just graduated college at 30 or 35. I take that back. I know some people do lifelong learning. Ed recommends I like Ed's recommendation of maybe looking at the districts, but I'm okay with them. I understand it's not easy. It's not going to be like a perfect break by any means. And I think that's it. I'd like to vote and approve this stuff. Or I would like to ask if we can, because we're not going to agree on everything, can we just vote item by item and readdress the items that we don't agree on? Because I want to get something going. We need to make some improvements to the board, but I don't want to wait on what I believe is going to be the demographic question in itself.
Yes, I think there's a path where we can take some action today and begin moving this forward. Christine?
Thank you, Ben. We are thinking in like-minded ways today. I see 6 items here, and I think 4, I'm sensing very general consensus, maybe even 4.5. It is the item that I would like to see us take down the road a little bit in the interest of time is the composition and the source of appointees or non-appointees, and what to do about our seems chronic absenteeism of some of our existing. So I would like to make a motion that we advance the items, the following items: start time, hybrid meeting, host optional meetings in various locations, maintain the quorum of 7, and the term limits, unless someone here rejects that, and that we vote to advance those changes, but that we agree to continue the efforts on honing and agreeing, gaining consensus on the committee of, the committee compositions and the procedures, who
who appoints and doesn't. That's our can of worms, in my opinion.
Okay, we have a motion
I'd
made
like to
by,
offer a friendly amendment, if I may, that I think the.
Josh, can you wait and see if we get a second? to
Yes,
the
sorry.
motion? We have a second to Christine's motion.
I'll second it.
Oh,
Steve Hollenkamp seconded the motion. Now, Josh, you're ready.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think as a friendly amendment, I'd like to suggest that the term limits maybe you hold off on that, because I would see a scenario where the community and the underrepresented demographic split has a more close relationship to how term limits are also created. So for example, if elected officials are to remain as part of the board makeup, that term limits may be adjusted to correlate, closer correlate to that. And so I think those two things are maybe a little bit more interrelated and should probably be thought of together rather than locking us into term limits that were created with the thinking of the committee being as it's shown on the screen. That would be my only suggestion.
Mr. Chair, I accept that friendly amendment or to my motion.
We have
What
a-
does that mean?
We have a proposed amendment to delete the term limit item from Christine's motion for approval today.
I'll second the amendment offered by Josh Frank.
Okay, we have a second on that amendment. Any discussion on the amendment to delete that one item? Yes, Terrence?
Yes, we're talking about elected officials and like, so how many people voted for that elected official? I know they won an election, but do they represent 100% of a region? Do they represent 100% of a demographic? I think the answer to that is no. So I don't see that having a representative on this board that's an elected official is beneficial to us. I think we can accomplish what the people in those regions and the demographics would accomplish by, or what are interested in by having our demographic and our geographic seats.
Okay. Oh,
If I may, just really quickly, I think the point of the amendment isn't necessarily about elected officials or unelected officials or anything about that. I think it's more of, I don't think we should tie the hands of staff if they're going to be going back and taking another look at the board makeup, to tie their hands and say, well, you have to look at board makeup all over again, but you're limited in term limits. I'd rather than take a look at those two things together. They may not change. The term limits may stay the same as they're recommending now, but I'd hate for them to feel like they are obligated one direction rather than being flexible enough to come up with a better solution if they can find one. So again, it's nothing to do with my opinion of the board makeup versus your opinion of the board makeup. I just think it's for flexibility's sake and to get the best option possible, we should leave that open for staff to look at both those things together.
Terrence, further comment?
Yeah, my comments weren't exactly in relation to that. It was just in general. Several members have brought up, the elected official deal. So I just wanted to kind of bring it back in there that I like my elected official, but maybe that person doesn't represent our transportation needs and transit needs well. I'm just saying it doesn't mean just because you're elected, you're good at everything and you can appoint people that are going to be unbiased, and have the community's best interests at heart. Maybe not. I'm not saying they will or won't. I'm saying I don't see that as a necessity here on the board.
Okay, are there comments from any of the committee members online about the amendment to simply delete the term limits from our vote today? Anyone online care to comment? Hearing none, Ed, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say, to follow on to Terrence's comment, some of our elected officials are countywide. And so, they don't really represent a district. And sometimes they tend to appoint people near where they live because they know them. And so we end up with elected officials who are supposed to be countywide, but their appointees are invariably in their neighborhood.
Okay, good point. Yes, Lloyd, have a comment on the amendment.
Can I just hear the original motion restated, and then I will decide whether I need to come.
Christine, you want to take a stab? I've got your
I can restate
5
that,
points.
and I'll add the friendly
Yes.
change that Josh suggested. So I am making a motion that we advance the items that whereby we seem to have consensus, and those are the following. the change of the start time, to maintain the hybrid meeting format, to host optional meetings around the county twice a year or as we deem necessary or opportunity presents, maintain the quorum of 7. That we advance those today, right now, and that we further continue to address the perfect solution or further changes if there is one.
Right, and this amendment would delete from her original motion approval of the term limits. That's what's on the floor.
Okay, I'll save comment for that.
Okay, yes.
I just, let's say that does pass, which you just said, when would that go into effect?
That's a question for Johnny. I think we'll take that to the TPO board.
Right. You all approve that, you can forward that to the board in a write-up. I even know that the CAC wishes to amend the bylaws to change the start time, have a hybrid meeting format, post 2 optional meetings and a quorum of 7, and that you all would like to revisit the proposal to adjust the term limits, demographic membership, and geographic districts at a following meeting.
Hopefully at the next meeting.
The next meeting.
Rick, go ahead.
As just stated by Christine, she has changed her motion. Motion she just made is different from the one she originally made. The motion you originally made included the term limits. Then you had an amendment by Josh Frank to delete that.
Right.
You just restated your motion, not including that.
But she preceded that by stating that she was leaving that out.
Okay, so are we going to be voting on the amendment now?
We're going to vote on the amendment to
Okay.
delete that one item for Christine's motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Terrence.
is it appropriate for me to make another motion?
Let's deal with this one first. Let's deal with this amendment first. If there's no further discussion on this amendment, which simply deletes from Christine's original motion that we approve the term limit provision as provided by staff, all those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Now,
Opposed?
2 opposed. Any online opposed? Motion passes with 2 negative votes. All right,
Chair.
now I'm sorry,
Who were the 2 opposed?
Ed and Terrence.
Thank you.
All right. So we've approved that amendment. We now have before us a motion that includes, what is it, Christine, 4 items for consideration to be approved by the CAC to be the remainder of these recommendations to be considered at an upcoming meeting. Is there any further discussion on the motion to approve these 4 items? Anyone online care to make a further comment?
I have a question.
Yes, Rick.
If I might. The 4 items that we're now considering under Christine's motion, Johnny, do those 4 items require a bylaw amendment? Any one of those 4 items require a bylaw amendment? I would think not.
No, I'm not really sure on the rules of that. I wish I could tell you.
We don't have to have a bylaw. We don't have to have a bylaw amendment to change the time that we meet.
No, but I think the 4 remain.
Well, maintain
If
the
you all
quorum of
decide
7.
if
We're
you all
already
decide to
doing
keep the
that.
quorum the same, let me see, I think I would suggest keeping that in the recommendation, like voting on it to do a bylaw amendment. If we actually don't need that, wouldn't be consequential, but just to like get that approval listed to forward a bylaw amendment would make it easier for me to write it up. If you do need it, we have the ability to present that to the board.
Well, my problem with that is the recommended action as you submitted to us was to approve the proposed changes and forward to the TPO for consideration. Your recommended action does not include anything by footnote or otherwise about a bylaw amendment. I'm not voting to recommend a bylaw amendment. I'm voting to approve the 4 items that Christine is talking about because I don't have basically an objection to them as a maintenance issue. But I don't think they rise to the level of bylaw. So if we're going to include that in there, I've got a problem voting
I
for this.
wish I could say that that's true. I don't know if meeting start time or the optional meetings need to be added to the bylaws. I can't say for sure whether they do or not. So it would be my preference for you to err on the side of caution and just say, we recommend to amend the bylaws to adjust the time format, optional meetings, and forum.
Okay, well, does Christine's motion include a recommendation to approve an amendment to bylaws or not?
Not as it's been stated. I think the question is, does Johnny's recommendations lead to an amendment of the bylaw change? And only you can answer that. I don't know.
That's how we're going to present it to the board if we see that a bylaws amendment needs to happen. So even if today you take action to just approve the proposed changes to the 4 items that we discussed and then forward it to the TPO board for consideration, when I write up that recommendation to the board, I will let them know whether or not a bylaws amendment needs to happen. And so if it needs to be amended, they can do that on the 14th.
So the answer to your question is it's a bylaws amendment if needed.
Okay, but it doesn't need to come from the CAC as a recommended bylaws amendment. No, it's not. I don't think Christine moved.
That's correct.
All right.
Any other comments?
Can we restate the motion? What is it we're voting on?
Sure. We're voting to approve 4 recommendations as presented by staff. The 4 recommendations are change the start time to 6 p.m., continue the hybrid format, approve the optional locations, which is recommended for 2 times a year, and maintain the quorum at 7 members. Is that correct, Christine?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't want my motion?
Mr.
I'm
Chair?
sorry. There's a question from someone online. Go ahead.
Yes, this is David Bailey again. I just want to make sure with the motion, with us approving the 4, we're not, we're still leaving it open for research for the other items. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Thank you, David. Terrence Trot, have an amendment.
Yes. Well, not an amendment. I'd like to move that we approve it all. And I would like to add,
I really can't do that until I consider this motion. Okay. So we have a motion to approve these 4 recommendations from staff and to further study and report back at an upcoming meeting on the remaining recommendations. Any further discussion about this motion? All right. There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Christine, for offering. Terrence, did you want to try to make a motion to include the other 2?
yes.
You're recognized.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to include the other 2 and add the 65 plus slot to the demographic.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion seconded by Ed Majerski to approve the 2 remaining items as recommended by staff. Any discussion on that item? Yes.
Well, I agree with Terrence's motion. I would vote for it at this point, but I'm not going to vote for it because I think there's enough concern among other people to look into the others. But I do agree with the recommended actions, all of them. But I do not think I will vote to support.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment? I would only say that I kind of like Josh's suggestion of 15 and 16 that you made earlier as at least a transitionary phase. And that's all I'm going to say about the issue. Terrence, go ahead.
just have a fear that this is going to drag into 2023, 2024 before we actually make those changes. If we don't start, and maybe if we have to pull back, or if something isn't effective, we make a change. I'd prefer to say yes and then fix a few things than no and not get there.
Fair. The chair has a slightly different view. At least we've taken some action today, and we have hopes that possibly even by the next meeting, Johnny, we could come back with some refinement and further discussion on the composition of it. Anyone on the line care to comment on motion to approve the 2 remaining recommendations?
I just wanted to say real quickly, for those interested in the 65 and up category, it is always up to the board, as I understand it, that we are able to add at-large seats as we fit, potentially. And so there are 5 existing right now, including an under 30 and a Hispanic at-large, et cetera. So we have the power to always, I think, add a 65 and up seat at any time. So just throwing that out there.
Okay, good point. Anyone online care to comment on the motion? Hearing no comment online and no comments in the room, all in favor of the motion to approve the 2 remaining items and add a provision for a member over 65, please say aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed? Okay, all opposed, say nay.
Nay.
I think the voice vote was in favor of the nay. We're going to stick with what we got. Unless anyone wants a roll call. Hoyt?
I don't want a roll call, but I want
Thank
to
you.
make I do want to make an additional motion if the chair would entertain it.
I will.
So I would like to move in terms of, as Johnny and staff go forward to consider these last 2 items of debate amongst the committee. I want to move that as part of that debate that there will be slots for the elected maintained as currently done. So any of the discussion regarding the other seats is fine, but any discussion should include that the current electeds who appoint members to this committee, that process will continue. So that's my motion.
Can I clarify that before I ask for a second?
Yes, please.
You're limiting that to the elected members of the TPO board.
Correct. Just the elected members of the TPO board.
Not the different.
No, not the expressway authority, not any of those, just strictly the elected
All right.
officials.
That's Hoyt's motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Christine, second. Discussion.
Just to clarify, you're saying that any scenario must include at least the elected officials from the board.
Correct. Those appointments must continue regardless of any other discussion.
Wait, continue. Sorry.
Yes, Terrence, go ahead.
I don't understand what you mean by continue. Like, if a person's term were to end, they don't get kicked off the board, or when we have the new structure?
I think he means those positions on this committee would continue to be represented. I don't think it should tend to affect anyone that's currently appointed.
Correct. So my intent, because we've had some discussion about it, I am of the opinion that having the elected officials have power to appoint people to this board is very important. There are some elected officials that I don't like, and frankly, they're idiots. But I think it's good for them to have the ability to appoint people to this board because they are elected by voters. I mean, we've had discussions in here about, well, this person doesn't represent everybody and this person doesn't represent anybody. Well, if it goes to a whole the staff-only process, we're going to have that same problem. And that's no disrespect to Johnny or Beth or all the hardworking staff that we have, but each one of these is flawed in some way in terms of who controls the power to put people on this board. And to me, at least, there's one section of people that are actually elected in a democratic process by the voters, and those are the elected officials. And so that's why I'm advocating for this motion, because I think it's important that the the elected officials continue to have the ability, even ones I don't like and don't agree with, to put members on this board because they are accountable to voters. And that means they are accountable to the community to a degree. So
As long as they don't appoint idiots.
they can do that. if they want.
Yes, John.
Just to clarify, because I want to make sure I have this right, is that by elected officials, you mean county commissioners, city of Tampa representatives, city of Plant City representatives, and city of Temple Terrace representatives, as well as the school board and any other elected official. That does not include, for example, the port, the airport, HART, the planning commission, and the expressway authority.
That is 100% true.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody understand the motion? Johnny, have a comment?
To clarify what you're talking about, reserving, though, there are 11 elected officials serving on the TPO board, talking about potentially having 15 seats reserved for demographic, 15 for geography, and then 11 for elected officials.
No, so I'm not getting into the demographic or that. I'm simply saying whatever process you come up with, and I don't, we can have a bunch of different options, but they must include the 11 slots for the elected officials. That's what I'm saying.
So his motion is regardless of composition, it at least includes those 11 appointments on this committee. Rick, did you have a comment?
With that dialogue, I think I understood. All right,
Thank you, Josh, for clarifying. All elected officials, not just city, county. Any other comments or questions on the motion? I don't think I have recorded a second. Is there a second on this?
I
motion?
seconded.
Christie,
You
you
did that,
did.
yeah.
Correct. I'm sorry. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Johnny, you want to comment?
Since I was directed to bring back this presentation at the next meeting to explore the committee makeup, that this might be a little premature, kind of like putting the cart before the horse, since we're going to come back with a new scheme for dividing the county into districts and a new scheme for dividing the demographic seats. I understand the need, but I think maybe if you want to continue with the motion, it might be better to just say direct staff to consider that as an option.
Well, and Johnny, this is no disrespect, but you can come back with stuff next week, and I'm still going to have the same opinion on what I feel in terms of the elected officials having the ability to make those appointments, which is why I'm moving now that you must include them.
Shall.
Can I offer an amendment?
Of course you can, Don.
Instead of just the elected, can we say all appointed?
I don't think that was.
You can offer that amendment. I'm not sure you're going to get a second on it. Is that amendment? That
Yeah.
all appointments from the TPO board
Yes.
remain in the structure of the appointments for the CAC?
Yes.
All right. Is there a second to that amendment? Anyone online care to second that amendment?
I'll second.
We do have a second. Okay. Is there any discussion about it?
Who was
Anybody
it?
else?
I'm sorry, Chair.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Who made the second?
Sharon, come on.
I'm sorry, Sharon.
Thank you.
Any discussion online? Boyd?
I can't support his amendment. I mean, we've had this discussion for a long time. I just, I think it's important not to have, and that's no disrespect to the individual members who serve at the capacity of those appointments, but I felt like part of this process was to get away from having some of those appointments. So I certainly won't be supporting the amendment.
Okay, and I would only comment that Johnny has flexibility, of course, of retaining those appointments, that your motion deals only with those 11 elected officials. Terrence?
So now that that was brought up, I don't see the difference between representatives of the CAC that would be representing appointed folks versus representing elected folks. So again, it would go back to my whole thing that this 1515 does a good job of covering our needs.
Other discussion? Anyone online have a comment? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just want to clarify. So what we're saying, if someone's appointed by an elected official, then will they be given like the vacancies or what the need is so that we're still pushing the diversity? Or, you know, for instance, saying like I'm in Lutz, so we need somebody in Lutz in this region for you to appoint to kind of include everybody, or are we saying elected officials can get 11 seats, anybody, therefore, you know, maybe lessening that diversity?
I think that's what would happen.
Well, I think that's a
Getting
fair
a little
question.
more confused as we go. Can we kind of stray further from this? I think Hoyt may have suggested that the best way to handle this is to not divide among 15 districts, but make sure that we retain 11 seats specifically for elected officials. And then the remainder, whatever's left over, can go to countywide districts divided somehow.
The intent of my motion was to say that you can come up with whatever plans you want. They must include the 11 elected. So that's all that my original motion intended.
I think his motion has nothing to do with the other makeup. Can be by districts, can be by age, can be by any category you want. Speaking for you, but that's my
That is
understanding.
correct, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. All right, further discussion. We have an amendment right now that Don Skelton made a second. We're discussing the amendment, not Horace motion. Chairman.
I would just say that it seems like we'd be going up to 40, 41, 42 members on the board if we did this. And we had a conversation earlier about too many members on the board making us ineffective.
What would be more like what Josh said, where we had the 16 appointed and the 15, then we can do the geographic and demographic representation.
Somebody's going to lose out. If we're talking about 30 slots and we're adding 11.
Yeah,
That's
31
11.
total.
Okay, there's going to be at least 10 or 11 slots out of this 30 removed because they're going to be for elected officials. Or we added them and now we're at 40.
I think we understand that, but that's technically not his amendment. His amendment is simply to add the appointments from the non-elected officials on the TPO board to maintain their ability to make an appointment to the CAC. Try not to confuse them. All right, I don't see any further discussion on the amendment. Separate from Hoyt's motion, which is to maintain at least a minimum of 11 elected officials, we have an amendment that we're going to vote on that would also add in the appointees to this committee from the TPO board. All those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion failed. The amendment failed. Now we're back to Hoyt's motion, which would instruct staff to include at least the 11 elected official appointees as positions on this board.
That's
As a member. All right. Any further discussion on that motion? Anyone online care to comment further? All right, I think we can vote on the motion. I think we can try a voice vote for that. All in favor of Hoyt's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
I think we need to have a roll call vote. Cheryl, if you would call the roll, please.
Bill Roberts,
Yes?
Rick Fernandez,
Yep.
David Bailey,
Yes.
Carolyn Brown,
Yes.
Hoyt Prindle,
Yes.
Christina Bosworth,
No.
Misa Morrison,
Yes.
Stephen Hollenkamp,
Yes.
Christina Costa,
Yes.
Don Skelton Jr.,
No.
Artie Fryer,
You may have lost already.
yeah, Ed Murjerski,
No.
Sharon Gaman,
Yes.
Terrence Trott,
No.
and Joshua Frank.
Yes.
Ten to 4, motion passes.
Okay, motion is approved. All right, thank you for that. Mr. Fernandez, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think that ended our agenda action items plus one or two, if I'm not mistaken. I have an action item that I want to bring forward before we go into status reports, if I may be so allowed.
Go ahead and proceed.
Thanks, sir. Hopefully everyone here and virtually received emails from me over the course of the last several days. And not to mention at our last meeting, my intention to bring forward a renewal of my motion to strike 2 line items from the TIP. That motion having been made back on June 1st during our TIP review hearing. I'm going to move now to renew that motion, and specifically for the reporter. I renew my motion of June 1, 2022, that being a motion to strike 2 items from Table 1 of the 2022-23 to 26-27 TIP. The 2 line items specifically by FDN number are 4450562. That's westbound I-4 to southbound I-275, and 4450571. That's southbound I-275 to eastbound I-4. That's my motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second to strike previous activity. Is there a second?
Second.
Clerk Treadwell seconds the motion. Discussion on the motion.
If I may.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Briefly, we've been down this road so many times. I hope this is quick one way or another. But for anyone who may not recall the history of it, I made this exact same motion with regards to the exact same lane movements back in March of 2022. At that time, the motion passed. This committee agreed and moved to strike those 2 lane movements from the TIP and pass that recommendation on up to the board. That action was all taken under the previous TIP. When we met again in June, we were considering the new TIP. Those same lane movements were still in the TIP. They were named differently. When we talked about them in March, they were amendments 8 and 9. When we talked about them in June, they were line items in Table 1 identified by their FPN numbers, no longer amendments 8 and 9. But again, exactly the same lane movements, exactly the same issues. The vote back in March was 10 to 8 to remove those line items from the TIP. The vote in June was 5 to 5, so the motion failed. My concern at that time was that we had an abysmally low turnout at that meeting in June. We only had 10 people here, that's the vote, 10 to 10, and a 5 to 5 vote is a failure under Robert's rules. It was my sense that the voice of this committee had been expressed multiple times since January was not being expressed in that vote. So I was hopeful to bring it forward again now when we had more individuals in the room. We actually have a significant number here today and online to get a more accurate count of what this committee actually believes on these issues. So that's a historic precedent for it. That's why I'm making the motion now. And I appreciate Chair you allowing me to advance it so we don't lose our quorum.
Sure. Discussion on the motion. Or you made the second.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. All right, so we have a motion and a second to strike these two items. Terrence, you have a comment?
I'm just wondering, or asking, were there 0 changes between what the line items called for in March versus what the line items called for in June? Or did any aspects of it change?
They're the same. The same lane movements.
And we had 10 people, which met quorum, and we had a 5 vote in June.
That's correct.
Ed, you have, I'm sorry.
Nothing.
Ed?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that to me, that southbound to eastbound movement is such a disaster. I mean, commonly, traffic backs up beyond MLK. It's actually would be very difficult for somebody coming down to get across all that traffic that's queued back if they actually wanted to get off at MLK or Florida, Nebraska for that matter. And I just think it represents a major safety problem. And so I can't support that motion.
Thank you. Other comments? Anyone online have a comment? I will comment on 2 things. One, this work is underway to try to address the issue that Ed has mentioned. So the action that we're taking today has the effect of saying we're revisiting what we voted on in June to try to make it in compliance, or at least similar to our action taken previously. I'll report whatever the committee decides to do. I'm going to be voting against the motion.
Chair.
Yes.
If I may, just one slight correction to that statement. I don't know, it was made in good faith. Clearly, there is construction already underway on 275 north of I-4. However, the construction related to the downtown interchange, what we've been euphemistically referring to now for years as the quick fix, that construction has not yet begun. In fact, is not likely to begin until later this year or even into 2023. So the lane movements that we're now talking about have not yet been affected. They have not broken ground on them. In fact, the contractor was only recently selected back at the end of June. And they are, in fact, having some discussions about some modifications that could be made that might mitigate some of the damage. This motion is simply intended to continue to express the intent of the committee, as we have since January, that these lane movements, say, affect wall relocations in Tampa Heights. If you remember, that's what started all of this. This is a way to stop that from happening, or at least begin to mitigate it. But indeed, construction has not begun. There's still time to make changes, and this is the way to make that point yet again to the board. But I thank you. At this point, I'm tired of talking about it. I'll accept your verdict either way, but not comfortable. We have enough people around now to do it.
Further discussion on the motion. Anyone online care to comment? I think given the importance of this, I'd like to ask for a roll call vote if I may. Cheryl, do you mind calling the roll one more time?
Sure. Bill Roberts,
No?
Rick Fernandez,
That would be a yes.
David Bailey has signed off. Carolyn Brown,
No.
Hoyt Prindle,
Yes.
Christina Bosworth,
Yes.
Misa Morrison,
No.
Stephen Hollenkamp,
No.
Christina Costa,
Yes.
Don Skelton Jr.,
No.
Ed Murdurski,
No.
Sharon Gaman,
Yes.
Terrence Trott,
No.
Joshua Frank.
Yes.
Motion fails 6-7.
Thank you all for considering.
Thank you for bringing it up. Moving on to status reports. We have time for status?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just really.
Yes,
quickly,
Josh, go ahead.
I have something that I'm debating as to whether or not it needs action, but I think I'd like to bring it up nonetheless, if you don't mind. A lot of the conversation today with the SIS is something that spurred something that I've been thinking about for quite a while and has come up in a lot of the conversations we've had in the past few months. This board and the TPO has a statement or a commitment for the equity and non-discrimination. They also have an adopted plan and principles for Vision Zero, as well as equity, sustainability, and resiliency. One category that I think is missing from a lot of the lenses that the TPO looks through in terms of projects for safety, projects from the 5-year work plan, et cetera, for the TIP, is a statement or a commitment of some sort on trip reduction, vehicle miles traveled, as well as induced and reduced demand, which is a topic that I certainly bring up as much as I can. It's a topic that is becoming principal in a lot of other counties and cities. And I would like to see staff and perhaps this board and the TPO board explore a similar level of commitment to either reducing trips across the system overall or recognizing officially induced and reduced demand as actual principles of the way traffic moves around rather than just philosophical ones, and to sort of solidify a position on the large debate of level of service for cars and level of service for people. I think in the SIS report that has come up in at least almost every single bullet point in terms of safety and Vision Zero. But again, I think if we were to take a better stance, a broader stance around the idea that induced demand, expanding corridors only further brings more cars into those corridors. And that is something that runs counter to a lot of the principles of some of the other things we've made commitments to. If we were to make a similar commitment towards those things, I think it would put a lot of the conversations we have on the right path, but also in better relation to the goals and objectives that are established in other areas. So my motion is I would like to have this board recommend that staff begin the research and the process for crafting a similar style commitment or statement as similar to the non-discrimination and equity statement, for example, in regards to trip reduction, vehicle miles traveled, level of service, and induced/reduced demand. And that's where I'll leave my motion.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second to Josh's motion?
I'll second.
Christine?
Can I ask a question about it?
Rick Fernandez, second. Christine, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you. When you say, I'm in favor of the motion as you described, but I wonder, when you say trip reduction, are you wanting to look specifically at single occupancy vehicle trip reduction, or just do you want to just keep it at large?
I think I'll leave that at large for now, because I think you could think of trip reduction in terms of vehicular miles traveled, for example, which is a much more representative way that information is presented in terms of trips. I think you could also consider it single occupancy vehicle. In general, I think that it may not be a shock to folks on this board, I feel very strongly that we have the capacity in roads here to sustain us long term. and therefore the additional capacity that we may need for our population growth should be better offset with transit and walk bike improvements and other things to shift folks from their cars to other modes as they see fit. Again, not forcing people into any one mode or another, but without that commitment to understanding that the county is moving into a direction that we are shifting. We are going to prioritize projects that shift folks from car trips to other modes. Without that level of commitment, I fear that we lose a little bit of the leverage in things like the SIS and the LRTP and other things. So I would just like to see that commitment up to the same level as some other similar categories that we have. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Other discussion on the motion? We have a motion and a second to request this work with staff to provide some additional information, substantial additional information. Yeah, do you have a question?
I'd just make a comment. I 100% support anything we can do for TDM, transportation demand management. I think the subject of induced demand is a really complicated one, and I would suggest it's not including that, only because, I mean, I understand totally about induced demand, but when demand is induced because we've added capacity to the facility here, generally that has the effect of reducing congestion on other alternative facilities. So I just am going to say induced demand, I understand it, it's really complicated, and I would support a motion that was strictly promoting transportation demand management. The whole issue of induced demand is a really complicated one, and I think needs to be dealt with on a facility by facility basis.
Clearly, this is a complex issue, and I'd like to ask Josh if this motion passes to work with Johnny and staff to try to make this bite-sized.
Yeah, of course. And Ed, I only mentioned induced and reduced demand as one of several topics in this big bucket that should be addressed in some sort of statement. Not neither pro nor against. I think it is worth having some sort of acknowledgement or statement on the record that the county can then point to and say, we believe it does exist and is complicated and should be considered in a lot of what we're doing. But this is not a statement that is saying induced demand is the law of the land and every project is going to be determined on that. It's one of many in that subject area. So I would hope that in the spirit of trying to find a good statement that the county can support, you would vote in favor of this to keep all options on the table and keep it as open as possible.
Okay, you can answer.
Thank you.
Any comments from committee members online? Hearing none, all in favor of Josh's motion, which has a second. Please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Please say nay. Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to jump a little bit on the agenda while we have a quorum and ask if the committee would like to consider taking a position on the sales tax referendum for the surtax, which is coming up in Hillsborough County in November. Is there any interest in providing guidance to the TPO or at least going on record for or against the sales tax? Thoughts?
I certainly would recommend that this committee support the sales tax. It should have never been declared unconstitutional to begin with, but for some judicial activism. It already passed in this county with 57% of the vote in 2018. And, we hear all the time about the backlog of projects that can't get done, especially in, South County and East County. And these funds are critical for that. But to me, more importantly, as Josh was talking about with transit, this community cannot grow and thrive if we don't fix the transit system here. And those funds are necessary to be able to fund HART and some of the other transit projects we want to fund. An important part of this is that we lose out on a lot of federal matching dollars because we don't have a dedicated transportation funding source like a lot of communities do. This helps to fix that and makes us eligible for federal matching dollars that we are currently losing out to other communities. So I certainly hope that this board will take a strong position in supporting the surtax.
Anyone care to make a motion?
I will make a motion to have the committee tell the TPO board that it supports the transportation tax as.
Second.
Josh Frank seconds it. I just want to echo what's going on. I've been talking about transportation issues since 2010, 2011. We consistently hear from DOT, large projects in this county fail to get off the ground because there's no local match to fund them. I cannot accumulate in my head how much money we may have lost over the past decade not having those funds available. So I want to bring this issue to the committee. I'll report whenever action you take, but it's clearly something that I think is important for the community. Christine.
I'd like to comment that I do favor and will vote in support of this motion, but it's critically important to me that I understand that our the allocations that were supported by the voters that were put into the constitutional amendment remain intact. There were very specific allocations for transit, for safety issues. I mean, literally a pie graph that ensured every voter that they were going to, you know, what are they going to get for their money? And so I think that it's just very important that our elected officials and anyone in a voice where the budgeting is concerned, remember that and continue to make the voters' wishes, to heed the voters' wishes in terms of allocation of the funds as they come in.
That's a great point. Yes,
So my understanding, Christine, is that when the commissioners approved this to be put on the ballot, that they had actually adopted the percentages of the actual ballot initiative with a slight tweak because there's no longer an independent oversight committee.
Well, there is one, but it's kind of.
But it's not the
less
same.
truthfully toothy than it was.
But there's maybe like a 1% difference in weight compared to, yeah.
Is your understanding like that would be in perpetuity regardless of the elected official compositions?
That is my understanding because it's essentially the 30 year.
30 years?
It's a 30-year.
Yeah.
That's good enough for me.
Because the tax is only a 30-year tax, so.
Thank you for helping me understand that.
Sure.
Any further discussion? Ed?
Yeah, I think the MPO, I think, has done a really good job of laying out what could be accomplished with the additional funding. I'm not sure we heard that from Hart yet, and I'm kind of disappointed that we haven't heard that from Hart, because if we're going to give 45% of it that I fully support, I would think if I worked at Hart, I'd be working my butt off, being able to tell people what I'm going to do with that money.
Have an update to provide on that. I don't know if you'd like to hear it after you vote on whether or not to support a position or before.
I think the fact that there's an interim plan is good enough. Go ahead.
Very short, so I reached out to Hart staff asking if they would make a presentation this month. They declined. They said that they may be available at the November meeting, which means that they would only be available to make a presentation after the ballot initiative is already voted on. So in lieu of that, I got a frequently asked question snapshot dealing with the question, what improvements or enhancements is Hart proposing? 1, increased service frequency across existing routes. 2, innovative solutions and mobility options. 3, new local and express bus routes. 4, capital projects and transit center modernization. 5, capital replacement program to include diesel, CNG, compressed natural gas, and electric vehicles. And lastly, premium bus rapid transit.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Ed. I'm not sure we got a lot of meat on the bones in response. I certainly invite them to come in November. It would be particularly interesting to hear what they propose, assuming that the ballot initiative is passed. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Greg.
Just briefly, I I supported this initiative wholeheartedly, walked neighborhoods, got petition signing stuff done back in 2018, and supported it being renewed in 2020, but that wound up tanking. But I'm somewhat conflicted now for reasons having to do with language in the ordinance, in the resolution, that I appreciate today differently than I did before. And I'm not going to get into that now. I'm only going to say that I don't want to be on record as supporting this in this vote. So I'm going to excuse myself from the room. I don't think abstentions are permitted, if I recall correctly. So I'm going to excuse myself from the room for the vote. I don't see that it affects the quorum. And I would like the record to reflect that I'm sending myself from the room.
We'll come back.
I will.
Any further discussion on the motion? Any further discussion from our members online? Johnny, I'm really hopeful that our technology will allow our members online to be seen at future meetings for too much longer. All right, let's go ahead and take a vote. I think we can try this on a voice vote. All the committee members in favor of the motion to support the sales tax referendum, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone online care to vote either way? Record the motion passes. Thank you, Hoyt. Appreciate it. Johnny, thanks for the hard update. We have other business we need to attend to. We're going to have to refer on our status report today.
No more unfinished business. The only thing I'd add in the addendum is that I included that attendance roster. Heard a lot of conversation today about maybe taking action on some members. Everyone who's missed 3 meetings has been reached out to. In some instances, I haven't received a response yet. So whether today or at the next meeting or sometime in the future, I implore you all to take a closer look at that attendance sheet.
Fair enough. And I'm certainly willing to consider any motions in that regard. Yes.
When Johnny gets responses from the people with all those absences, can you forward that out to us and we can possibly see what the reason is for those?
It's all right with you. I can report on that. I mean, there's nothing preventing me, but I would kind of feel uncomfortable forwarding that combo because sometimes I ask them what the excuse is, what the reason is, and it could be health related or something kind of personal.
Can we put something to indicate though that the 13th is optional? Because it kind of looks like all the other meetings.
Yeah, that's a perfect. And I think if you want to come back, I mean, consistent with our discussion earlier as a committee, let's come back next month with this item on the agenda for consideration for action or no action. Yes, Josh.
I'd like to move that to agenda number 2, so we have it with the roll call and tackle that first and foremost if possible, while we have a full quorum and before we get to other action items for next meeting.
I have no objection to that.
Attendance.
Is that what we're good? I wanted to ask a question about that too.
Okay, if you'll just make that as a recommendation, Josh, I think, I don't think you'll find no objection. Yes, comments on the attendance.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate your courtesy in that last little thing that happened. I don't know if somebody's already said this, maybe they did. But in keeping with something that Hoyt said earlier, sending up a warning flare, would you please make sure that you contact Mr. Knudsen? Since we haven't seen him since February, frankly, I don't know if I've ever seen him. And let him know that at least one individual on this committee is intent on moving to have him removed from the committee at the next meeting. He can do whatever he wants with that, but I was going to do it today, but I decided to withhold, keep my powder dry. But I will do that at the next meeting. Whether he's here or not, frankly, probably, but he ought to know.
Well, and I think, unless someone particularly wants to take action today, I think what we'll consider at the next meeting is whether or not to declare any of these seats taken. Terrence.
Are we talking about that being a one-time thing, or we're going to have this attendance roster at the top of the agenda every week? I
I got the sense of the committee that they wanted to revisit this issue at every meeting. Is that the intent of your recommendation, Josh?
I would,
Yes, it is.
I would say that, oh, sorry.
Well, no, I think that the four that were approved are, whenever those are enacted is up to staff. But I think the intent was that the reorganization, the reapportionment of the board should come back whenever possible, as soon as possible, so we can tackle that, because I do think there is merit in the board at large positions based off of the non-discrimination and equity statement. I think that's valid. So I'm encouraged to see what staff can come up with the guardrails we've given.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't want as a board member to be tracking people's attendance. I think we can recognize that, or if Johnny, in his reach out, if he doesn't hear back, he can let us know, hey, we haven't heard back from these people. And one of us can make a motion to have them removed from the board. I don't know if it has to be like, here's the troublemakers every week or whatever. Like, I just don't know if that's necessary. I think we can accomplish the mission without it being a community center.
We'll bring it back next month and see where it goes. Josh?
Really quickly, Johnny, do we have, you said you've got a lot of positions on hold because you've been waiting to settle this. Does that include an appointment by Councilwoman Hurtak or not?
Her staff reached out to me about a month and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer, and asked if I could forward over some candidates that filled that application because they wanted to select, or I should say, Councilwoman wanted to select them. So I passed maybe 5 or 6 applications to her legislative aide. I haven't heard back from her directly. Beth told me that in her previous briefing with the councilwoman, she asked as like a follow-up question about who we would recommend for appointment. And I think Beth said, hey, we're still working out the structure. Maybe it would be wise to wait a month or two and see where that conversation lands for select. That may impact the decision based on like demographic need.
I'd like to see staff advance those 3 vacancies for next meeting so that we can have some people to vet, ideally, and start to fill those vacancies. I think we've waited long enough, and I'm not sure we're going to come to a consensus on the organization next month. I hope we do, but I'm not optimistic. So for the Councilwoman Hurtak's position, the neighborhoods at large, and the women at large position, I'd like to see some candidates for this board to vet next month if possible.
Okay. Terrence.
I just wanted to ask a point of clarification. I believe I heard you say that an elected official asked the TPO to recommend a member.
Sometimes the elected officials have an appointment in mind, someone they already know and feel comfortable with, and represent their interests. That person's appointed. Sometimes they lean on us, ask us to make some suggestions. And so in that case, we would take a look at any special qualifications that they may be interested in. Maybe they want somebody with a certain level of education or from a certain district or passion regarding a certain project. So we'll pull applications, candidates that we think might meet that need or that requirement, and then pass the resume to the elected. And from that point forward, it's solely in their hands to appoint.
Now that process, would you do that process with any other appointee that comes on the board, or comes to the board in a search, I guess we'd say?
So historically, very few have asked us for our opinion. Most of the time, they just appoint them, and that's the end of that. I think it works out well if they want to have a dialogue about what the needs are. It certainly helps us get closer to hitting our demographic characteristics, needs, right, ensure representation, but not always.
Thanks.
Rick Fernandez.
Taking off of what Josh said, you know this was coming because I gave you a heads up on it. Lynn Hurtak, I did not even know that she was supposed to be making an appointment to this committee until I called her shortly after she was appointed. So that would have been around March, again, March and April. Maybe she was appointed in April, so May, June, somewhere in that time frame. As I understand it, Beth Alden at the last board meeting asked the entire TPO board to hold off on any appointments until our current shuffle is addressed one way or another, however the dust settles. Okay, fine. So Lynn Hurtak is holding off on her appointment as a result of that. That appointment could have made a difference in a vote that we took just a few minutes ago right here in this room. Number one. Number two, I understand that the planning commission's seat, which has been vacant about a minute, is already teed up for approval by the MPO board, and we should be seeing a member of the planning commission represented here by sometime in October. So I don't understand why it is that a Tampa City Council member is being asked to hold off on her appointment while the planning commission is being advanced as quickly as they are. You know, at some point, Johnny, it starts looking like the game gets rigged. So my suggestion is that whatever dam is up now, it be broken, that you go ahead and move forward as Josh suggested, and definitely get Lynn Hurtak on a fast track. I think she's ready to appoint as soon as somebody tells her it's okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Other new business, other comments before we adjourn? Next meeting is October 5th.
Good question.
Yes.
We just like skip the members' interests, or is that, I mean?
We just skipped it in the interest of time, unless you've got a particular point.
I'll save it for next time. I don't think anybody cares.
Well, we care, of course, go ahead.
I'd like to walk one too, so can you be really brief and I'll just.
Okay, we have two members' interest items. Go ahead.
Sure. So my really brief members' interest item, because Christine was talking about the roundabouts. The roundabout at Palm Avenue Boulevard, I think, is an example of bad roundabout design when someone is putting the movement of cars ahead of the movement of people, because there's a split off where you can make a right turn there without going through the roundabout, and it causes a lot of confusion for drivers who almost like wreck when they think they're in the right place and then swerve over, and obviously it's a pedestrian or bicyclist going through there.
You know,
Yeah, depending on the
one of
bridge.
the
yeah.
No,
you're right, that is weird.
The slip lane. Yeah,
Get rid of
slip
that.
lane, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd certainly like to see them get rid of the slip lane there. I think it's dangerous and doesn't help. There's not enough traffic to warrant it, so that's it.
I kind of agree with you. Christine, you have members' interest.
Mr. Trot, you get credit for this because you reminded me of an issue when you asked, like, well, can we now presume that Vision Zero is going to be interjected into all projects? You may recall that I had proposed a neighborhood greenway, bicycle boulevard that would be an east-west corridor, and a very large major intersection would need to be made safe. And that intersection is one that is already on FDOT's action item, and they partnered with the city. But it's the intersection of Dale Mabry, South Dale Mabry Highway, and Henderson Boulevard, and Morrison Avenue. So it's one of those, yes, it's very, very, very complex, but they're already spending money and doing drawings for maintenance. I am not confident that we have the best kind of improvements that are in the toolkit being put on the ground there. So I'd like to ask for an update to this committee, if you all can agree to that or commit to spend the bandwidth on this. This is a classic example of where we have good intent with that, with Vision Zero policies, but what's really being put on the ground, not sure. So, and I'm pretty sure Dale Mabry affects every one of us somewhere in our lives on a regular basis. So this might be a good prototype issue. Thank you.
Quick question, so I don't get in trouble. As a member, how do I reach out to a project manager of a project to get status possibly from them?
City, county, DOT, what do you know?
It's just, I don't know exactly where they work from. I think it's a contractor. Represents.
What's the project?
Which project?
It's my roundabout at Sims and Palm Riverview. County. So county.
John,
I mean, I have no problem reaching out. I just be in sunshine.
Yeah.
That's not a sunshine issue.
That's what I want to know.
Johnny, I hope you get to.
Okay.
At least someone in the county who may be able to direct you to the contract.
If I were to call PM, be okay? Just like it stands. All right, take him for dinner. Thanks.
Anything else come before the committee before we adjourn? Thank you all so much for your time. I know we volunteered. The meeting is adjourned.
Really quick, on September 9th, this is not for the committee, but we're doing a little voter registration table at the restaurant. If you know anybody that needs to get registered, spread the word out there.
Which restaurant is this here?
Strand Public, we're on, across from Burger King.
Oh,
Yes.
you and I had.
Yeah, first time. First time there, it was great. You had a great server.
Brianna.
Well, Rick, you realize it's gonna have to give us.
We'll let you know. And you can
I was really excited to ask you about it.
Sorry. Before you leave, just wanted you to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm probably getting a ticket on the street after this. I just got word at our civic association meeting from DOT that they've actually come up with a way possibly inside. Build a bridge to the inside instead of adding the lane to the outside. And